1%, close to session highs. The Dow up 94. That is a gain of 0.2%. NASDAQ right now up 86, up 0.4. The NASDAQ 100 index up 0.4, and the Russell 2000 up by 0.9%. 10-year 4.47%. The 2-year 3.99%. Gold up 0.7%. 33.34 the ounce, and West Texas Intermediate crude 65 even, now up by 0.7%. Balance of Power continues right now. Back we go to Washington once again. Your hosts, Joe Matthew and Kaylee Lyons.
All right, Charlie Pellet live from New York with us here on Balance of Power, live from Washington, covering politics and the latest from the White House that we've heard from the protests and the violent clashes we saw with police, and in some cases, of course, the deployment of National Guard troops by President Trump, who's saying that this was a good idea. Taking to Truth Social, we made a great decision, he writes, in sending the National Guard to deal with the violent, instigated riots in California. Of course, Gavin Newsom, the governor, sees it very differently and is threatening to sue Donald Trump for going around him as the executive of the state of California and the commander-in-chief of those National Guard troops. This is something that came up in a fascinating interview earlier today with Andrew Cuomo, former New York governor, now running for mayor of New York City. Spent some time with Bloomberg's Tom Keene and Paul Sweeney on Bloomberg Surveillance this morning on Bloomberg Radio. Let's listen.
This gets into President Trump's strategy, I believe. And look, first of all, on the immigration issue, he's very clear in his campaign. He believes it's an issue that works for him. During the campaign, he said he was going to deport criminals, dangerous criminals. And everybody said, yes, support dangerous criminals, of course. Now we're deporting 7-year-olds and we're disrupting families. And by the way, we're deporting people who shouldn't be deported. So that's a change. But this issue works for the president politically. The president is also very good, and I worked with the president in the first Trump administration, worked with euphemism. We had a lot of controversy, but this is a different tempo for him. Wayne Gretzky, skate to where the puck is going to be, not where it was. The Democrats have to adjust. They are skating to where the puck was. This immigration issue, in some ways, is a distraction from what Trump is really doing with cities, which is cutting the budget in a way that is so dramatic that you could really cause major difficulties for urban areas.
Governor Cuomo, pro tip, when you're going to talk a hockey, you're in a mayoral race, you pick Jean Rattel or someone like that with the New York Rangers. You don't go with Gretzky. Andrew Cuomo with us here as we look at this mayoral race. Okay, Robert Kuttner, no friend of yours, writing in American Prospect, he says, did Cuomo peak too soon? You've got the tensions of the primary. If you take the primary, the tensions of a general election with different independent candidates, and that is the present mayor in the back pocket of the president of the United States. And if we get L.A., as Paul mentions, here, can you imagine this? I mean, I'll let you pick the geography, Governor Cuomo, but the present mayor of New York, can he protect the citizens of this city, given the relationship with the president after what we've seen in L.A.?
Short answer, no. And let's remember how extraordinary these issues, what's happening in L.A. This is the exact reverse of what normally happens. Normally, it's the local government that makes the decision on how to handle an emergency and calls on the federal government. So a mayor or a governor would call on the federal government and say, I need help, please send the National Guard, or please send in additional federal help. I don't believe there's been a time where the president has sent in federal troops. You'd have to go back to like the 60s, and President Johnson and Wallace, right? That's how far you have to go back. So this is Trump being Trump. This is Trump on this issue of immigration. I'm muscled. It's law and order. These cities, these Democrats, they're filled with illegals, and I'm going to come in, and I'm going to come in hot and heavy. He started in L.A. It will happen in New York. It will happen. He knows the formula, right? It happened in New Jersey.
Is this formula to go after you? I mean, this is
His
anticipated,
formula is to create chaos in the cities, and he is the voice of law and order. And you know, cities, all those Democrats, that's where all those illegal immigrants are, and he's going to come in and he's going to clean up. The flip side is, okay, create chaos in LA, create chaos in New York, create chaos in Chicago. Pretty soon, you create chaos in the nation, and that's bad for the economy.
The view from Andrew Cuomo speaking with Bloomberg's Tom Keene earlier today. There's, of course, Kaylee, the legal side of this and the political side of this. We wanted to get into the legal aspect because the president is seizing on a component of the U.S. Code on Armed Services, Title 10, a provision that allows for the federal deployment of National Guard forces if there is a rebellion or danger of a rebellion against the authority of the government of the United States.
Yeah, also states the president may call into federal service members or units of the National Guard of any state in such numbers he considers necessary to repel the invasion, suppress the rebellion, or execute those laws. Of course, the governor of California, Gavin Newsom, does not agree that those conditions have been met right now, which is why he's threatening to sue this administration. But we want to get the take of a legal expert here on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. Robert McWhorter is with us. He's a constitutional lawyer, also practicing criminal defense and civil rights lawyer, founder of the law office of Robert McWhorter. Welcome back to the program, Robert. We appreciate it. As we understand that legalese, which you can interpret far better than I, did the president actually have grounds to send those troops in yesterday?
No, he did not have grounds. This is not an insurrection or anything like a true rebellion. I mean, the instance that has happened before was in 1965 when President Johnson sent in the National Guard in Alabama because Governor George Wallace made it very clear that he was going to allow the attack of civil rights, peaceful protesting civil rights workers. And it was a truly dangerous situation. That's the last time this happened, and nothing here is in comparison. In fact, the situation in the office. These are protesters.
Robert, if I could just jump in, if someone looks at the videos of what has happened in Los Angeles and sees some of these protesters, for example, throwing rocks at police officers, why would that not constitute a rebellion against an authority?
Yeah, a bunch of kids throwing rocks is not a rebellion. It is something that local police, and by their own statements, are perfectly fine handling. When protests, sadly, go bad, and certain elements do that, they have selective policing, prosecution, and they go get those kids or older adults that are committing violent acts like that, and they arrest them, allowing the peaceful protest to go forward. This has nothing to do with that. Local police were handling this situation just fine until Donald Trump put the National Guard in there. Really, the technical mechanism, the National Guard, he in a sense nationalized the National Guard using Title 10, and I don't think the authority extends. And if I may, the stark and shocking hypocrisy is when January 6th, 2021 happened, which was a clear attack of violent people with arms on the Capitol, he sat on his hands and did nothing. And yet, when you have some kids protesting his immigration policy, now he sends in the National Guard. That is the shocking hypocrisy going on here.
Well, of course, Gavin Newsom, Robert, is threatening to sue, and I expect that will happen at some point here when we actually see the court documents. We'll let everybody know. The president, on the other hand, is threatening to, or at least suggesting it would be a good idea to arrest the governor of California. Tom Homan, the border czar, suggested as much. And Gavin Newsom responded in a pretty remarkable moment on cable news last evening. Listen to the governor of California on MSNBC.
He's a tough guy. Why doesn't he do that? He knows where to find me. But you know what? Lay your hands off 4-year-old girls that are trying to get educated. Lay your hands off these poor people that are just trying to live their lives, man. Trying to live their lives, paying their taxes, been here 10 years. The fear, the horror. The hell is this guy? Come after me, arrest me. Let's just get it over with.
Come after me, arrest me, Robert. I don't know if you'd take the governor's case, but would the administration have the grounds to do it?
I would take the governor's case in a heartbeat, and I would happily do it. In fact, I'd think about taking it pro bono, although I imagine he actually could afford to pay me. But it is an important case, and he has, I think, good grounds to say that what this is a violation of state sovereignty. And in fact, it tends to be the conservative Republicans that talk about the value of state sovereignty with federal overreach. And this is a perfect example of federal overreach. And you know, I must say, too, when you compare this to 1965, there was a national consensus that had developed by 1965 that segregation and racial injustice was a national problem that President Johnson needed to intervene on. There is not a national consensus about Donald Trump's policies. In fact, Donald Trump does not have a mandate. He did not win. He is the duly elected president, but he didn't even win a majority. A majority is 51%, and he won 49.3% of the vote. So this is the key difference, I think, and this is what Gavin Newsom is basing his statement on.
Well, when we consider that the president still believes this is a winning issue for him, and he has far greater approval on issues like crime and immigration than others like the economy or his tariff policy for right now, Robert, it does raise the question of what happens if this continues to escalate, how it plays politically, but also the legal considerations around escalation. As we had the Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, suggesting he would deploy active duty Marines from Camp Pendleton. Is there legal grounds for an active deployment of U.S. troops against, in some cases, U.S. citizens on U.S. soil? Can he use the same justification? Is there somewhere else that you would expect the administration to turn?
Well, the answer is no, and the specific statute is what's called the Posse Comitatus Act of 1878, which specifically says that you're not allowed to use U.S. military in a law enforcement role. And that was a statute that ended Reconstruction, and it was the southern states that wanted that statute passed. It is a wholly different thing when you have active military being proposed versus a National Guard, which technically is still under the state of California. They're the one who funds the National Guard, et cetera. Now, they are often incorporated into the national military in times of war or crisis, but that is not this. So this is a whole step of chest thumping that goes a step further, and it's all this kind of, making a big show. And by the way, the show is necessary for Donald Trump because if you actually look at his enforcement of immigration, he's failing. His numbers of deportations are way lower, about twice as low as what Joe Biden's numbers of deportations show. So there's all this energy being spent on these other things, but he's actually not doing the job that he promised the American people he would do.
Robert, there's a good chance this spreads to other cities or maybe continues in Los Angeles. God knows that these things can carry momentum. And we heard earlier Andrew Cuomo reacting to the idea of this taking place on the streets of New York or Chicago. If we're in for a summer like that, I know that we're talking about National Guard troops and the use of Marines and so forth. It's going to be the courts that finally handle this in the end, to adjudicate a finish here, correct?
Oh, absolutely. And by the way, I'll just note that the examples you just gave, I would be shocked if this ever happens in a so-called red state. Donald Trump is doing this only in the so-called blue states, although there's protests in red states that are the same going on other places. This is selective, and this is in a way to make political points and attack political enemies and attack political kind of groups that don't like Donald Trump. It is not about his enforcing immigration law. It's about him being a national reality show, and that's how he thinks he gets to stay in power and be elected.
I suspect we'll be able to talk again about this before it's over. Robert McWhirter, always a pleasure to spend some time. Robert, constitutional lawyer, practicing criminal defense, civil rights lawyer based in Maricopa County with the office of Robert McWhirter. I'm Joe Matthew alongside Kaylee Lyons in Washington, painting out of a couple of buckets here today. We've got the matter of the protests in L.A., Kaylee, as well as trade talks underway today between the U.S. and China. It's happening in London, and we hope to know a lot more about this by the time we reconvene at 5 p.m. Eastern on the late edition of Balance of Power.
Yeah, as it stands right now, the principals that include the Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, the Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick, and He Lifeng of China are still in the room trying to hammer out an agreement on export controls and rare earths. So we'll reconvene later this afternoon with the latest. But of course, in the meantime, Bloomberg Business Week Daily is straight ahead right here on Bloomberg Television and Radio.
This is Bloomberg Business Week Daily, reporting from the magazine that helps global leaders stay ahead, with insight on the people, companies, and trends shaping today's complex economy, plus global business, finance, and tech news as it happens. Bloomberg Business Week Daily with Carol Masser and Tim Stenivek, live on Bloomberg Radio, television, YouTube, and Bloomberg Originals.
And a very good afternoon, everyone. Yes, indeed. Carol Masser, Tim Stenivek, live here on Bloomberg Business Week. We're once again on the West Coast. We've got a special Cisco remote coming up your way tomorrow, but we're staying out here out west, although I got to say, our focus is, too, on the West Coast right now, Tim.
Yeah, it certainly is. Everything happening in Los Angeles. We're going to be covering that at the top of our show today. In addition to that, other things happening on the West Coast, a little north of Los Angeles in Cupertino. Mark Gurman is going to be joining us a little later. Before that, Ed Ludlow on everything happening at Apple's Worldwide Developer Conference.
And I got to say, we are also focusing on what's going on across the Atlantic. We're focusing on some negotiations between U.S. and Chinese officials. Over in London, a lot of the discussions on rare earth minerals, so we're going to talk about that as well. First up, though, folks, let's get a check on that trade. Some small moves we're seeing when it comes to stocks and bonds. Let's head it on over to our New York headquarters and Charlie Pellet.
Hi, thank you very much indeed. Good day from New York and from London to Los Angeles. We got you covered here at Bloomberg with the Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ, all advancing right now. WWDC, though, underway, as you mentioned, in Cupertino. Apple shares are declining. We've got Apple now down by just about 0.6%. We'll update you from WWDC throughout the day here on Bloomberg. S&P right now up 18. That is a gain of 0.3%. The Dow up 98, higher by 0.2%. NASDAQ up 89 points, a gain now of 0.5%. The Russell 2000 higher by 0.9%, and our Mag 7 index trading higher by 0.7%. The 10-year yield 4.46%, with a 2-year 3.99%. Gold is up $23 the ounce. Spot gold at $33.33, a gain of 0.7%. West Texas Intermediate crude trading higher by 0.6%, $64.94 a barrel. And Bitcoin now rallying 2.1% at 108,451 on Bitcoin. Tesla has been hit by a pair of downgrades, underscoring mounting concerns on Wall Street about the electric vehicle maker's outlook following last week's clash between CEO Elon Musk and President Trump. Both Argus Research and Baird have cut the stock to equivalent of hold ratings, cementing Tesla's reputation as the least loved mega-cap stock among analysts. Tesla shares today, though, they're up by 1.5%. For on-demand news, 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Charlie Pellet, and that is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie, thank you so much. Carol Masser, along with Tim Stenivek, live here at our San Francisco bureau for Bloomberg News. We should remind everybody, I know you've been listening to Bloomberg very closely. Los Angeles is in its 4th day of unrest, with California Governor Gavin Newsom vowing to sue to block the Trump administration's deployment of National Guard troops in the city, really escalating a standoff that we've been watching throughout the weekend over immigration raids that sparked protests over the weekend. And so we are continuing to see this escalation and also this back and forth. It really is, Tim, it feels like a test between federal rights and powers and states' rights and powers.
And just today, President Donald Trump suggested that Gavin Newsom should be arrested over his response, and the governor vowing to sue the administration for deploying National Guard troops in the city. Former New York Governor Andrew Cuomo, who's had his eye on being New York City mayor, joined Bloomberg Surveillance and the team there with Tom Keene and Paul Sweeney a little earlier. He gave his take on President Trump sending in the National Guard over the weekend.
This is Trump being Trump. This is Trump on this issue of immigration. I'm muscled. It's law and order. These cities, these Democrats, they're filled with illegals, and I'm going to come in, and I'm going to come in hot and heavy. He started in L.A. It will happen in New York.
All right, that, of course, was former New York State Governor Andrew Cuomo, now running to be mayor in New York City. That was earlier with the surveillance team of Paul Sweeney and Tom Keene on Bloomberg Radio. We want to get a legal view on this because there continues to be back and forth. With us right now is, from Los Angeles, is Jessica Levinson. She's clinical professor of law and director of the Public Service Institute at Loyola Law School, and joining us on this Monday. So great to have you here with us, Professor Levinson. First of all, in terms of what President Trump did, was this decision within the law and purview of President Trump, and purview, really, to be fair, of any president?
Yes, and I appreciate you asking it that way, because the question is whether or not this federal law gives any president the power to federalize the National Guard. And the answer is, in my view, that this federal law is a broad grant of authority to a president, and that there's language that says a rebellion, or dangers of a rebellion, but it's not clearly defined. And essentially, the statute says when the normal channels don't work, when the normal law enforcement mechanisms don't work, then the president has the power to federalize the National Guard. We should be clear about what this does and doesn't mean. It does not mean that we are suspending something called posse comitatus, which means that the military it cannot act as a domestic law enforcement agency. That is still in effect. Right now, the National Guard can just act in a supporting role, can help to protect federal agents, can help to protect federal property. So I think at this point, the president is, regardless of your policy views, on pretty firm ground. The next question, whether or not, if there's an escalation, the president has the power to kind of pull the cord and say, now I want to invoke the Insurrection Act. That is legally a harder challenge, a higher threshold for the president. And then I think there would be more vigorous challenges to the president's authority.
Professor Levinson, in your view, what was the moment that it became clear that local law enforcement could not handle the situation? And indeed, the switch was flipped, that this would be a case, in your view, that would actually allow the National Guard to be deployed. What was it that you saw that happened?
Well, I want to be clear that I think there are plenty of people who disagree that that moment occurred. And I think there are critics of the president who say that moment didn't occur, that LAPD was getting things under control, and that we weren't in a situation that would give rise to the president having this power under this federal law, again, Title 10. And so I don't want to offer my particular perspective on whether or not we hit that moment as somebody who analyzes the law. What I'll say is we have a very big gulf of opinion. We have the governor and the mayor saying we were fine, we didn't need help. And then we have the president of the United States saying, yes, you did. And this is a situation that's rare because typically speaking, if the president does federalize the National Guard, it's because a governor and or local leaders have asked him to do so.
All right, so then we have on the flip side, again, like I kind of kicked this off, Professor Levinson, on this idea between federal powers and state powers, right? I feel like it's, in our fabric as a U.S., as our nation, right? Like there's always kind of, just on some level, a little bit of battle between these two sides. California is suing the Trump administration over what has happened. We have seen the California governor, Gavin Newsom, come out on a post on X. So do they have any legal position or power? In our last hour, balance of power, I heard one lawyer saying, I'd love to take his case. I think it's a strong case. What do you think?
So what I think here is that Governor Newsom is going to argue that the president is infringing on state sovereignty, and that under the 10th Amendment, which we all know from high school civics, reserves powers that are not given to the federal government, to the states and to the people. And I think that Governor Newsom is going to argue, first and foremost, you're infringing on state authority. Second, I think that he'll make the argument that the predicate facts, the prerequisites before you can federalize the National Guard under Title 10, that they're simply not there, that this isn't a rebellion. We're not seeing the danger of a rebellion. In my perspective, the federal law that the president is operating under is a very broad grant of authority to him. I know I said that before, I'm emphasizing that here. And so I do think that a challenge to his authority does face an uphill battle. I'm not putting my thumb on the scale of what I think is happening on the ground so much as what I think the language of the statute provides.
So I guess my question is about if this escalates, and I think that's a concern for a lot of people, Professor. You mentioned the idea of an insurrection and what that actually would look like, and then the Trump administration would have to face another question about the deployment. And I'm curious, what would, in your view, characterize an insurrection?
It's a really important question. And if you look at the Insurrection Act, this old act from the 1800s, it doesn't have bright line definitions. And that's fairly typical. What we're looking at in order to see if the president has the power to invoke the Insurrection Act is whether or not there is some sort of violent or unlawful upheaval, whether or not people have essentially taken to the streets. We're looking to similar questions that we are currently under Title 10, but we're looking to see if things are, for lack of a better way of describing it, appreciably worse. And again, we're looking for a situation where I think the assumption behind the statute is that the normal channels aren't panning out. So if the president does decide to use the Insurrection Act, that would be a significant escalation. It would, again, suspend posse comitatus, which we talked about briefly before, and it would allow, what does that mean? It would allow the National Guard to act as domestic law enforcement. It would allow the National Guard to do much more. They could, instead of acting as supporting cast members, essentially, they could instead help arrest, implement searches, seizures, etc. And that would be very different from what we're used to.
Hey, one last question very quickly, 30 seconds, if I may. What's the difference? How do you know the difference between protest, which again is so much a part of what we do in the United States, versus insurrection? Is it very clear? Just quickly.
I think it's not clear. It's clear on the sides, right? So, and what we're seeing right now is a debate among our elected officials as to whether or not we're there yet.
All right. Going to leave it there. Listen, you covered so much important ground. Thank you so much. Jessica Levinson, Professor of Law and Director of the Public Service Institute at Loyola Law School, joining us from Los Angeles. Tim?
Well, now that's certainly the domestic front. Let's go to the global front, and specifically the relationship between the U.S. and China. Because trade talks between the U.S. and China kicked off in London today. The U.S. signaled a willingness to remove restrictions on some tech exports in exchange for assurances that China is easing limits on rare earth shipments. The meeting began today just after 1 p.m. local time. It's expected to extend into the UK evening. It may restart on Tuesday if necessary. With a reminder of what's at stake and the red lines for both economies, back with us, we've got Gracelyn Baskarin, Director of the Critical Minerals Security Program at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. She joins us from Johannesburg, South Africa today. Gracelyn, good to have you back with us. We appreciate you taking the time. Why, in so many ways, is this coming down to so-called rare earth materials?
Thanks for having me. It's great to be back. I mean, first and foremost, rare earths are in everything. And we've seen that in the last couple of weeks as companies have not been able to secure the licenses they need. We have seen disruptions to manufacturing. We've seen it most visibly from the automotive sector. For example, Ford actually paused the manufacturing of its Explorer in Chicago because it didn't have these rare earths. But we have to remember they're in defense technologies, they're in cancer treatment, they're in MRI scanners, they're in just about everything electronic. So what we have is both this huge reliance, and really there's no significant processing capabilities that exist operational today, which means that we are wholly dependent on China for something that we need a lot of.
Gracelyn, Carol and I last Thursday here at the Bloomberg Technology Conference in San Francisco spoke to RJ Scaringe, the CEO of Rivian, the EV maker, and we asked him specifically about rare earths. And partly what he said, and he's been clear that he is working to lobby the Trump administration. His folks are communicating with them about the importance of rare earths, but he also told us, hey, necessity is essentially the mother of invention, and I'm confident that we're going to be able to do some of this stuff, at least in the near future, without rare earths. Do you think that's the case? Are we going to be able, from a technological standpoint, not to have to rely on rare earths for some of these things?
We are going to reduce our reliance. I mean, never underestimate the power of American innovation. We created a vaccine for a virus that we didn't know anything about a year and a half prior to that. So we will absolutely see, I think, a reduction in our reliance on them, number one, in terms of how much we need them. We're starting to create engines without them. However, that is a process. The second thing we're going to start to see is more capabilities come online outside of China. We saw, for example, that Linus is now starting to produce small scale at its facility in Malaysia. The U.S. is kind of trying to warp speed our own facilities in California and Texas. So innovation is going to be a huge part of reducing our reliance and increasing our capabilities.
All right, but how quickly does all that happen? Because I think the other thing we followed up with him, RJ Scarrant, is that none of this is going to happen overnight, right? So how long does it take to kind of make the switch? And then in the meantime, how much are we still reliant on China, or how long will we probably be reliant on China?
I mean, we're going to be relying on China at some level, in my opinion. And I know opinions vary on this for probably a few years in terms of being able to meet all of our capabilities. We have to remember this isn't just a problem of capital. In December 2023, China actually banned the export of processing technologies. And there were parts of the supply chain we actually realized we didn't even have the technical know-how in terms of how to do those midstream. So one is building the technical know-how, and that takes a bit of time. It's expensive. So realistically, even if we start to be able to get offtake by the end of the year through domestic capabilities and potentially through non-Chinese foreign sources, before we are comfortably reliant on non-Chinese capabilities for probably a few years.
Gracelyn, how much of this is an environmental story? To what extent is the processing of rare earths something that's done in China because other countries didn't want to deal with the environmental consequences of this?
The environment is no doubt one of the challenges that has limited other countries from developing the capabilities. You know, we use the term NIMBY, not in my backyard, because sometimes we don't want these things in our backyard, and we're very happy for them to be done far away. So that was certainly one component. The second thing I want to add to the environment component is generally the United States has deprioritized mining over the better part of several decades. Between the 1950s and the 1990s, the U.S. was actually the top rare earth producer in the world. We were the top uranium producer in the world. We had a Bureau of Mines that was responsible in government for coordinating all of our mining activities. We closed that in 1996. We ceded a lot of our advantages to China and Russia during this time, and that's how they really created a dominant position where the U.S. once was. So the environmental challenges certainly slow down permitting and some of these other dimensions of mining, but we also have to remember there was a broader government deprioritization of the agenda, which is how we found ourselves where we are today.
Well, that's what I was going to ask you. Was it because the government wasn't prioritizing? Was it because companies, really concerned about the bottom line and profitability and making money that they said China can do it more cheaply and more easily for us? Is it because we didn't have the labor pool? Why was it that the U.S. went from being a leader to basically, now it's China as the leader when it comes to rare earth minerals? What would you pin it on?
So if this was a multiple choice exam, all of the above, I hope, would be one option. But there's a few things, right? So when the government deprioritizes something, it creates a negative signal. As a result of government deprioritizing it and a lot of this moving offshore to China, Russia, Australia over time, then mine engineering programs have less need to produce mine engineers and other skilled labor for mining operations. So we have a huge workforce shortage here in the United States. Along with that, again, it is much cheaper to do it in China, where there are low environmental standards, where labor is much cheaper. If you go to a mine in Montana, you're not going to have a worker making under $120,000.
Right.
We don't have to pay a worker in China that same amount. So basically, the overall production costs fell too.
Gracelyn, thank you so much. Gracelyn Bascarin joining us. A headline crossing the Bloomberg: California suing for President Trump's National Guard use in LA unrest. So again, filing a lawsuit. This is Bloomberg.
It's 2:21 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. As we have been reporting, California is suing the Trump administration for deploying the state's National Guard in Los Angeles to quell unrest over the president's immigration raids. The move, announced at a news conference moments ago, follows tensions over anti-deportation protests. Stay with Bloomberg for the latest developments out of Los Angeles. We're also monitoring trade developments in the United Kingdom. Stay with Bloomberg for the latest out of London. Right now, we do have the Dow, the S&P, and NASDAQ all advancing. We are looking at a gain for the S&P 500 index, and it is now just within 2% of its February peak, driven by optimism over U.S.-China trade talks and resilient economic growth. Here's where we stand. The S&P up 19 at 6,020, a gain of 0.3%. The Dow up 119, up 0.3. NASDAQ up 88, up by 0.5%. Our Mag 7 index up 0.7%. The 10-year 4.47%. The 2-year 3.99%. Gold now up 0.8%. 33.36 the ounce, and West Texas Intermediate crude up 0.9%. 65.18 a barrel. I'm Charlie Pellet, and that is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
Hey, thanks so much for that update, Charlie. Do appreciate it. Charlie mentioning the headline, but worth repeating: California is suing the U.S. for Trump's use of a National Guard in L.A. unrest. California is suing the Trump administration for deploying the state's National Guard in Los Angeles to quell unrest over the president's immigration raid. The move, announced at a press conference on Monday, it follows tensions over anti-deportation protests. Demonstrators have clashed with law enforcement, sometimes violently, while Governor Gavin Newsom and President Donald Trump trade blame over the responsibility for restoring order. The lawsuit hasn't yet appeared on the court docket. We'll continue to bring you updates as we do get them.
All right, we are continuing to monitor that. We also continue to monitor different things that come out of the White House, and they certainly have made some comments when it comes to healthcare, pharmaceuticals in the United States, which is one of the reasons we want to really get to our next guest, GoodRx, I should say. They recently reported earnings. Just a little bit of background. Shares did jump after the drug pricing comparison software company. They did boost their guidance for adjusted EBITDA for the full year, following better than expected results for the first quarter. We did see analysts saying, some of them, that the EBITDA beat and raised as a good start to 2025 for the company. Let's get into the business and how White House policies are impacting GoodRx. Wendy Barnes is president and CEO of the company. She joins us from Charlotte, North Carolina. The company, by the way, a market cap of about 1.4 billion. Shares year to date are down about 12%. They're down more than 50%, though, in the past year. Wendy, good to have you here with us. There's a lot going on in your space. But I want to talk first and start with a new initiative that you guys have actually introduced today. It's called the Community Links Program. Why did you do this? What was the impetus for creating it?
Hi, Carol. Thanks for having me, and appreciate the question. So, I would say the company's been on a multi-year journey to best partner with retail pharmacies, with community pharmacies really being at the top of that list. And this is really the culmination of that work. And so what you've referenced, the GoodRx Community Link, is a portal by which community pharmacies, sometimes referred to as independent pharmacies, so think of those as really your non-chain pharmacies. They can be as small as a single pharmacy, or some community independent pharmacy owners have 50, 75, or 100 locations, but largely they're run independent of a broader management philosophy. And this is our effort to contract directly with these pharmacies in a cost-plus reimbursement mechanism manner. Look, it's not any new news to you or probably to your listeners that pharmacies continue to be under reimbursement pressure. And we believe that they are key partners in our broader mission to make medications more affordable and accessible for every American. And so this effort is really one in which we're trying to bolster reimbursement for those independent pharmacies such that they can work with us directly. And in addition to that, we're giving them access to 90-plus brand deals that we have secured with pharmaceutical manufacturers over the last 12 to 24 months, and those continue to grow, such that the reimbursement on those same drugs is favorable to those pharmacies. It's really no secret that pharmacies have long struggled to have a favorable margin profile on many brands that they fill. And this too gives access to those programs for those independent pharmacies.
Well, Wendy, anecdotally speaking, as the large pharmacies and the chains have come under pressure, whether it's over store closures or different things happening just in the space, we've all reported on what's happened in cities and the way that some of these pharmacies have closed down in certain cities. Are you seeing more people go to these independent pharmacies? I mean, anecdotally speaking, I can say that's certainly the way my family has changed its behavior, just thanks to availability and what pharmacies tend to actually have what we're looking for. But how have you seen that affect the overall landscape?
I don't know that we've seen a meaningful shift to independent from chain. I think there's still a pretty good mix of grocer versus independent versus chain, and candidly, you know, mail order / digital pharmacy. I think at the end of the day, what we see is in the 70 plus odd thousand pharmacy options that we have as consumers in the US, that as a consumer, you just really want to get your drugs on your own terms, whether it's mailed to your home with your preferred community pharmacist or at a chain or grocer. And we pride ourselves on working really with all pharmacies such that you can get your drugs when and where you desire to do so.
Do you see at all that the independent channel is shrinking? We've certainly seen it with some of the big pharmacy chains, right? We've talked about it. You've seen the headlines. But I'm just curious, when it comes to independence, Wendy, do you see any shrinkage in terms of the number of outlets that are out there, or no?
I will say in the numbers that we've looked at over the last couple of years, there is still a good number opening in any given month. I will say in our book, with the pharmacies that we work with, I haven't seen significant shrinkage, but I think there are certainly other data sources that would suggest that there are a number of independent and or community pharmacies that are closing and or selling their business to other owners. But in our particular book, it's held pretty steady.
How have independents traditionally reacted to the program at GoodRx? Because it's our understanding they've been a little skeptical about it. How do you make sure that they're embracing it rather than treating it with skepticism?
Sure. Well, I think, look, it's early days, to be clear, and we're going to be on a journey here. Communication is going to be the biggest part of this program, in addition to delivering what we said we intend to deliver, which is fair economics over the course of these contractual agreements as pharmacies agree to contract with us directly. And that, again, can all be conveyed through that portal that we stood up this morning. So for me, it's really going to be about how we deliver on the reimbursement mechanism through this partnership. And I think, the ongoing communication will support how the pharmacy community embraces this over time. We've certainly been sending out communications early on. We've been in dialogue with many independent pharmacy owners to speak through the program. But I think at the end of the day, it's really going to be the outcome of the program and the economics that we deliver that will prove it out over time.
Well, that's where I want to kind of just dig a little bit deeper, Wendy. For this to work for you guys, this new rollout, this Community Links program, the economics have to work right for the independent pharmacy. So I'm just curious what you can tell us how the economics are different for the pharmacy that directly contacts with GoodRx versus using maybe one of the pharmacy benefit managers, the PBMs, and their networks to dispense a prescription. What can you tell us more specifically about the economic advantage for independent pharmacies to use your route versus going to the PBMs?
Sure, happy to do so. So it's really, the agreement directly with us is rooted on a NADAC plus reimbursement. So NADAC is one of multiple benchmarks that is effectively a cost mechanism. It stands for National Average Drug Acquisition Cost. And we are negotiating with independent pharmacies to do this with that predicated as the baseline plus an amount that keeps them profitable on filling these claims. So that's really the precursor, if you will, and or the meat of how this agreement will work, which again provides favorable economics to these pharmacies. The distinction, Carol, as you called out, to perhaps doing it through a larger payer, when you think about how it works through, let's just say, a larger PBM, there are multiple patient pay / cash networks through which an independent pharmacy can participate. And when they're in that type of an algorithm, for lack of better description, typically it's going to search for not necessarily favorable margin for the pharmacy. And so there would be times in their previous arrangement whereby they may not always have favorable economics to fill those prescriptions. And by contracting directly, we're putting terms and conditions in the agreement that allow them to have certainty around not only the reimbursement, but also access to drugs that they're not fulfilling today in patient pay programs. Again, that would be the list of brands that I mentioned that I believe are 90 plus at this point. So they're going to have certainty around how they're reimbursed in this direct engagement through us that they're not getting through their arrangements today.
Hey, Wendy, we're watching everything happening outside of Washington and coming out of Washington really closely. We're expected to hear from the president in just a few minutes. There's an event happening in the Oval Office that's about a kid account event scheduled. It was scheduled for 2 p.m. We understand the press pool has gathered. If the president starts to take questions, we will certainly go there. In the meantime, thinking about healthcare in the United States, it is inextricably bound to politics, and no question, if the what the president calls the big beautiful bill were to pass, we could see, at least according to the CBO, estimates of a dramatic increase in the number of uninsured, almost 8 million. What does that mean for your business, and how much of your business comes from Medicaid and uninsured people today?
So interestingly, of the users who access our pricing on any given day, roughly 90% actually have insurance today. So I think there's a bit of a misperception that the overwhelming number of consumers who use us, in fact, don't have insurance, which is not the case. Having said that, who does come and look for pricing through our different platforms is your consumer who's motivated to check for competitive pricing, whether they have insurance or not. And we continue to be the #1 platform to look for the best price deal that you can find on any particular medication. So as it pertains to what may or may not pass in the bill, whether it's inclusive of Medicaid cuts, which continue to be advanced, and or other cuts that would put pressure on your typical household income, what we do know is that those should produce tailwinds for us as a business for consumers, whether they're insured or not. But specifically as it relates to Medicaid cuts and the number of individuals that may fall out of coverage, we do believe that that presents an opportunity for us to continue to support any American that really is struggling to purchase their medications.
Wendy, just got 30 seconds. You know, the word that we all use to describe the environment right now is uncertain. There's a lot coming at certainly leaders and CEOs. Just in your industry, too, you've got Rite Aid doing a bankruptcy. You know, I think about the macro within your business and just macro overall. Just got about 25 seconds. How do you look at the outlook, just quickly?
You know, the outlook, you're right. Turbulent is a fair description. Having said that, businesses that stay the course and have a mission that makes sense for the consumers in which we serve will continue to thrive. And our goal, of course, is getting medication affordably and effectively into the hands of every American who need it. And we believe we'll be in a position to take advantage.
Wendy Barnes, President and CEO of GoodRx, joining us here. Coming up, big day for Apple. We break it down.
It's 2:40 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. We are looking at gains for the U.S. stock market. Back to work Monday with the Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ, all pushing higher right now. S&P, by the way, just 2% away from a record. Higher by 14 right now at 6,014 on the S&P 500 index, a gain of 0.2%. We've got the Dow up 71 now, up 0.2 there. NASDAQ higher by 68 for the NASDAQ Composite Index, a gain of 0.4%. Our Mag 7 index up 0.6%, while the 10-year currently yielding 4.47%, the 2-year 3.99%, gold up $24 the ounce, 33.34, up 0.7%, and West Texas Intermediate crude oil up 1.2%, WTI right now at 65.35 a barrel. So stocks moving higher, driven by optimism over U.S.-China trade talks and resilient economic growth. Walmart's credit cards will once again be issued by Synchrony Financial as the world's largest retailer makes a renewed push into financial services. OnePay, that's a fintech backed by Walmart, picked Synchrony to issue both a co-branded card that can be used outside Walmart, as well as a private label card that will be available just for purchases at the retailer. Right now, looking at shares of Walmart, they're down little change, down under 0.1%. Synchrony Financial up by 3.6%. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News now wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Charlie Pellet. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
It is indeed. All right, Charlie, thank you so much. Well, it's a big day for one of the world's largest market cap companies. We're talking about Apple holding, of course, its Worldwide Developers Conference at headquarters in Cupertino. Keynote was about 1.5 hours ago, and we've got a bunch of headlines and information on our live blog. Apple, what it did do is unveiled a new operating system interface. It's called Liquid Glass. Kind of sounds cool. And for the first time, that same interface will work across the company's products. Apple shares, though, investors not so impressed. Stock's down about 1.5%. So let's head out to the event, to the conference at the headquarters of Apple is Ed Ludlow, of course, co-host of Bloomberg Technology. Ed, good to have you here with us. You've been a busy dude, that's for sure, over the last week or so. Busy day today. Tell us about today. Was it more about style rather than substance for Apple in terms of what it had to say?
Yes, but they would also argue that liquid glass and the update to the interface across all operating systems is probably the biggest that they've done. You know, it's interesting, the stock's off session lows, right, and it moved around, but I'll go to kind of like the ticker and the moment that the keynote kind of started, and we swung from modestly positive territory down at 1 point to almost 2%. And you know, you have to remember, this is Apple WWDC. It is a developers conference. A lot of what is announced is targeted at a group of people who are critically important in contributing to Apple's ecosystem. But it was almost kind of like a sell the news kind of event, both because a lot of what we heard Mark Gurman already reported, we all know that, and also because, you know, expectations that Apple at some point is going to give us a lot more on AI, those expectations weren't met clearly.
Hey, Ed, let's stick on the liquid glass portion of this. As you mentioned, we've been speaking with Mark Gurman for weeks leading up to this, and he had the news weeks ago that there would be this unified interface across devices. My question then and my question now, after it being unveiled, is there a learning curve here for consumers? We've seen mistakes that Apple's made in the past with redesigns. Apple Maps, more than a decade ago, certainly comes to mind there. But is this going to be a learning curve? Like, how different is this going to be as an experience? I mean, there are over 1 billion iOS users out there. They're going to have to get used to this.
Yes, but 1 billion iOS users, but you have to think about it in the aggregate of people that use a broader Apple ecosystem. So a lot of Liquid Glass's inspiration comes from the work that Apple had done with Vision Pro. You know, literally the UI and UX of that experience using Vision Pro, the translucency of it. And so by making it uniform, you know, having the same look across iPhone, Mac, iPad OS, and Vision Pro and Watch, you know, it just makes you more familiar and, I guess, open to using the full hardware suite of products, let alone the software suite of products. But again, like, you know, this is a stock that's been driven by trade headline, trade risk, tariff risk, pardon the expression. But it's a company who like will tell you time and time again that they're just focused on iteration, design, you know, executing on making things beautiful every year. And the problem is that last year, 2024, and indeed the year prior when they announced the Vision Pro, this event, the reason I'm here, all of us gathered at WWDC, there was much more of a clear, tangible news catalyst around it. This kind of goes back to what WWDC has always been, which has been for the people, the community that build for Apple, for the App Store, and for all of those devices.
So, okay, and that's, I guess, part of the value of going to WWDC, right, Ed, is kind of talking to some of these developers, feeling the mood about what they are saying. So what are you hearing from them? These are the kind of insiders, right? So I'm just curious.
So, we actually did get some AI news, and that piece of news was that Apple is going to open up its on-device LLMs, Apple's own work in proprietary models, to the developer community. The reason that that's a substantive piece of news is that's exactly how it works with OpenAI and Microsoft and Google and the Gemini teams. A lot of the success they've had in basically commercializing that technology is to say to developers, have at it. Here's the underlying model. Use it to make whatever you want to do better. And that makes the iOS, as an example, more appealing. So that was a big step forward today. But to the outside of the investor community, all of us that are consumers that have iPhones, there wasn't something there for us in that respect. And what was so interesting is that sort of drop in the stock at the start of the keynote, it actually coincided with Craig Federighi, the services software chief, saying, we will have a lot more to talk about with Siri later. You know, because this had nothing to do with that, the way that one as a consumer interacts with their phone right now.
Later? How much later? I mean, are investors and members of the developer community still waiting for a Siri that is as smart as some of these virtual assistants that we've seen from LLMs at this point?
Yeah, it's interesting. Like, you know, I'm here at WWDC, but I still was following what Gurman was putting in the blog in real time, and he made the point at the end that Craig was kind of at pains to point out this is what is new with Apple Intelligence. Here are all of the things that Apple Intelligence can do, rather than you're going to have to wait till later in the year to get more functionality out of it. On the other hand, like one of the things we got today was live translation in the iMessage and call context, but also through AirPods, right? But I even get like a sense of deja vu, because when I was at Meta Connect last fall, you know, Mark Zuckerberg was there on stage with his Ray-Ban Metas demoing exactly the same thing. You know, the ability to live translate in a nation like America where many people are bilingual, it's awesome when you consider the number of people that use an iPhone and are on the iOS system or macOS or iPadOS. But it ain't that new, and all the other technology companies are doing it as well. And that's kind of the frustration. It's like, give me the all singing, all dancing version of Apple Intelligence, which we interact with through Siri principally. And that's the bit you're going to wait for. And I didn't answer your question, Tim, because they didn't say later in the year.
No,
that's it.
That's okay. That's okay. I mean, look, it's a question that, you know, nobody really has an answer for, and maybe Apple doesn't even know at this point.
Well, wait, it's kind of like, hey, Siri, like, when are you going to get better?
Okay, let's not make everyone's phones freak out, Carol Master. Hey, Ed, before we let you go, you've been to a lot of these events, and as you mentioned, this is one for the developer community, and Apple's App Store and what you can do on an Apple device would be nothing without the developer community.
Yeah.
Have you had a chance to hear from any developers, to speak to anybody who's attending this, and just get an understanding for what the vibes are in 2025 when it comes to the developer community?
So literally, we had a guy called Paul Hudson on the show earlier. He is the creator of Hacking for Swift, Swift being the platform that many use to code for OS application and OS software. And kind of what we've gone over is exactly why he was excited, that, you know, when you build for one of the Apple operating systems, you usually use an Apple tool to do so. And he's, you know, was pretty jazzed and excited. A lot of people look at Craig Federighi as like the man, the rock star, the silver fox of software. And on stage, you know, they got what they were asking for to some sense, that like having on-device LLM access is huge for a lot of developers. It just makes their life in doing something easier. But the root of your question is the most important bit. We have the App Store today for a reason. It is attractive to consumers, and there are lots of apps there that are made by third-party developers. You know, I'm trying to think of a great example that Apple didn't make and someone else did. But you get the idea, and that's why all of this kind of update today is tracked, because it adds value to the broader services and ecosystem offering that Apple has.
All right, basic metric. You got Apple shares down 19% year to date. I look at something like Meta, it's actually up 19% year to date. So what is it that the investment community really wants to see from Apple to give it some love?
So I'm actually just pulling ChatGPT up on my phone because I was talking to ChatGPT about this earlier. Fewer than 60% of analysts rate Apple a buy, the lowest among its big tech peers. Apple's AI efforts are seen as safe by analysts. Reminder, it trades at 27 times earnings, which is slightly off its historic high. The point is so far this year, it hasn't traded. I know it's just so much fun to like use this as a tool, you know, inputting data from the Bloomberg. But like, so far this year, that 19%, it has nothing to do really with the AI story. As you guys know, it's tariff risk, the relationship with the administration and the president of the United States. But the risk going into today, and what was almost confirmed in the early minutes of that keynote was, well, what if AI does become the key risk to the stock? Because investors lose patience and they say, we want to see something more tangible. It's a little unfair because I don't think we went into today thinking we would get anything like that. It was really clear what we were going to get. It was for the developer community, and we did get it.
Ed, we do have some extra time with you, which we're grateful for. And you're our guy in Cupertino. We're keeping the seats warm for you here in the San Francisco studio. Liquid glass. You know, one thing that Apple is trying to figure out, and I think it's fair to say every consumer tech company is trying to figure that out, is the form factor for the must-have device of the future. You've talked a lot about where Humane did not work. We've talked to you a lot about what we could see from Sam Altman and Johnny Ives. When it comes to what you saw with liquid glass, does it give any indication as to how Apple is thinking about this?
It does. Look, what Mark Gurman's reported is that the 17 generation of iPhone will have glass curve size with no sort of screen border, right? And liquid glass is a concept, the kind of translucency of it, the way that whatever's in the almost the foreground of your smartphone screen or iPad screen is not interrupted by what's popping up. We think that there will be some hardware iteration of that to come. But you do raise a really good point, which is why have liquid glass uniform across all devices? Because increasingly it's not the be-all and end-all, the thing that's in my right hand, a smartphone. It is that I take messages on my Apple Watch. Other smartwatches are available. I take, different platforms that I rely on OS for on my MacBook. Other laptops are available, etc. You know, it's just a way of making it more uniform. So I think that there's definitely acknowledgement there. Whether the iPhone 17 has the features that Mark reported, we shall wait and see. But there was certainly a nod to that during the keynote, even if they didn't explicitly say, oh, by the way, the next version of the iPhone is definitely going to leverage this liquid glass concept.
Great stuff. Ed, thank you so much. We know busy day, early day. Ed Ludlow, of course, co-host of Bloomberg Technology out there at Apple headquarters in Cupertino, California, of course, at the Worldwide Developers Conference. Shares of Apple, though, they are still down about 1.3%.
Should note, we are monitoring everything happening at the White House right now. We will bring you any news if the president does start to answer questions specifically about what's happening right now in Los Angeles. In the meantime, I'm Tim Stenivek along with Carol Masser. Let's take a look at some stocks on the move today. With us is Bloomberg News equities reporter Alexandra Semenova. Alex, what's on your radar today?
Hey guys, always great to be on with you. We got to, of course, start with Tesla. We're all watching that stock after the very public blow-up between CEO Elon Musk and President Donald Trump last week. It's actually up a little bit today. This comes even as it got two downgrades from firms on Wall Street. That's Baird and Argus Research. Of course, investors have been worried about the reputational damage that this political fallout has done for the company, and they were also worried about the fact that it might not deliver on its robo-taxi promises. Obviously, this is coming at a very difficult time for Tesla. Shares are down about 27% in 2025, making it the weakest performer of the so-called Magnificent Seven stocks. And they had, of course, rallied after the election and then peaked in December. And obviously, it's been a really difficult time for the company. Elon Musk had political endeavors in the White House and then had this very public fallout. The stock fell 14% on Thursday, was its worst day since 2023. And obviously now Wall Street is just trying to assess the long-term damage.
Yeah, what I find notable about this, oftentimes, Alex, when you see downgrades or double downgrades such as this, you'll see the stock react accordingly. It seems like a lot of this was baked into the stock, given that shares fell, close to 15% just last week. So it's almost like in this case, the analysts are catching up.
Yeah, sometimes, analyst downgrades are a contrarian indicator, Tim. And obviously, when we saw the kind of sell-off that we did, there are still people who are big believers in this company and who saw it as an opportunity to buy in. One of my sources, Dave Mazza, he's the CEO of Round Hill Investments, described it really well. Companies like Tesla, they don't trade on fundamentals, obviously. They trade on something he called a dream premium. And I think that's kind of what's happening here.
Safe to say one of the big dream, but maybe also reality premiums is all things with AI, and that leads us to Meta. You are watching Meta today, and it definitely has an AI connection here.
Yeah, we got to talk about this incredible scoop by our Bloomberg reporters here. Meta is in talks to make a multi-billion-dollar deal with startup Scale AI. It could exceed $10 billion in value. This is, of course, according to sources familiar with the discussions who chose not to be identified due to their proximity to the deal. And basically, Scale AI provides data labeling services. It helps companies train their machine learning models. So really, really big investment here for Meta. It also works with customers like Microsoft and OpenAI. The stock is actually flat today, not big moves across the equity market, so not reacting very much.
Yeah, this is a fascinating write-up by our team, including Seth Fagerman and Rachel Metz. 28-year-old AI executive Alexander Wang, he went to Capitol Hill to tell policymakers what they needed to do to maintain U.S. dominance. And now Meta's set to throw Carol billions of dollars at this startup. It's pretty remarkable to see.
Yeah, they talk about, how they've evolved their business, increasingly relying on high-paid contractors with graduate degrees to improve AI systems, and has deepened its relationship with the U.S. government through defense deals. So Alex giving us some context as well. But it's interesting to see a very established company like Meta, but the AI grab, it's pretty intense. And when we're talking about maybe as much as $10 billion, that's some serious money. Let's get to, I think it's the number one gainer, it has been at points during the day in the S&P 500, the NASDAQ 100, Warner Brothers Discovery. You're watching that one as well, Alex.
Yeah, this was some interesting news today. It is actually splitting into two independent companies, Global Networks and Streaming and Studios. Global Networks will include entertainment, sports, and cable television brands such as CNN, TNT, and TBS. And it'll hold a 20% stake in Streaming and Studios. And the separation is actually expected to be completed by mid-2026, allowing each company to pursue its own investment deals and kind of operate as separate entities. And this was meant to unshackle, its fast-growing streaming business from the legacy cable networks that perhaps aren't doing as well. Obviously, there's been this big move into streaming services, while cable news isn't necessarily as popular anymore. And analysts were generally positive on this deal. Benchmark said it was an aggressive buyer on this news. Firms like KeyBank Capital Markets and Vital Knowledge also said it was positive, but the details of the deal aren't necessarily clear yet. So that's something to watch for here.
I don't know. I'm old enough to remember when bigger was better just a few years ago. And then now you have a company such as Comcast spinning off its media divisions into a couple different companies and figuring out what that's going to look like, Alex. I mean, it seems to me, and we heard Paul Sweeney talk about this earlier on Bloomberg Intelligence, at the end of the day, you don't know what necessarily is going to happen when it comes to these stocks or the businesses, but a sure thing is that the bankers are having a payday.
Yeah, they certainly are.
In a situation such as this.
They certainly are. And it's also been pretty incredible to see these massive companies that brought us these very cable networks now all foraying into streaming services, and then consumers are all kind of getting those packaged up once again. So kind of an interesting shift here.
Yeah, no doubt about it. What's old is new again. Like, I'm just waiting for then, there'll be the build out again.
I was going to say, in 3 years from now, everyone's getting back together, right?
Exactly. Alex Semenova there, back at Bloomberg headquarters. For more conversations, check out our Stock Movers podcast, 5-minute episodes on movers to the upside, to the downside. Listen to Stock Movers on Apple, Spotify, or anywhere you get your podcasts. Folks, we are continuing on Bloomberg Business Week Daily. If you're watching on TV, the close is coming your way in just a moment. This is Bloomberg.
This is Bloomberg Business Week Daily, reporting from the magazine that helps global leaders stay ahead, with insight on the people, companies, and trends shaping today's complex economy, plus global business, finance, and tech news as it happens. Bloomberg Business Week Daily with Carol Masser and Tim Stenovec, live on Bloomberg Radio, television, YouTube, and Bloomberg Originals.
All right, everybody, we are just about 1 hour away from the closing bell on Wall Street. Carol Masser, Tim Stanovic, live here on the West Coast.
It's lunchtime. 1 hour away from the closing bell, and it's noon here in California.
I'm always like, what time is it?
This is great.
It's noon right now.
Yeah.
Yeah, you look like you're ready for lunch.
I look like I'm just happy to be on the West Coast. You know how I am.
There's definitely a vibe
Carol had
here.
a nice California adventure over the weekend. I don't want to give away all the details, but maybe we'll have some time to talk about it.
later on. Yeah.
Yeah.
You
It's
did
something
too.
that
you left a little bit, but you still stayed.
I
West.
think when I was a kid, every fifth grader got to do.
Seriously?
In my school district, at least, it was pretty cool.
Not a fifth
So,
grader, but man, I felt like
it
a
was
fifth
really,
grader.
really cool.
In awe. This country, man, the more you travel around it, you realize how beautiful it is. Maybe we'll talk about that later. Right now, though, we do have Wall Street pretty much glued to their screens. They have been watching some of those talks between the U.S. and China. That's happening over in London. It's rare earth minerals. It's a lot of things. It's an important relationship. We talk about it all the time, right, Tim? So we'll see what happens. But it may go into the wee hours. Maybe it will spill over into Tuesday before we get some kind of news out of it.
We're also monitoring everything happening in the White House right now. The president is speaking, and he's actually just now giving a shout out to David Solomon at Goldman Sachs. He's speaking right now about Trump accounts, and we'll get some details on those, and we'll take you to the White House if we start to hear the president answer any questions with regard to what is happening in Los Angeles. That is certainly on our radar. In our 4 o'clock hour, we're going to be checking in with the folks in our Los Angeles bureau about the latest there.
We just talked about Warner Brothers Discovery. We want to dig a little bit deeper into it. And we've got a guy who has really written the book on HBO, understands the media world and what it means. So we're going to get into this kind of build out, breakup of legacy media, where it's all going, and what's going to really win long term.
Also, on the U.S. and China, we got a great voice coming up. Dexter Tiff Roberts is going to be joining us in just a minute. All that and more coming up on Bloomberg Business Week over the next 2 hours. First up, though, a check on the day's trade and some top business stories. Here he is back in New York City, Charlie Pellet.
Hi, thank you very much. Indeed, lots going on, and we got you covered from London to Los Angeles. And just getting word out of London that U.S.-China talks in London will continue tomorrow. That from an official. Stay with Bloomberg for the very latest. Stocks higher right now with the S&P just about at the best level of the session, up 18 at 6,018. That is a gain of 0.3%. The Dow up 101 points now, up 0.2%. NASDAQ up 94. That's an advance of 0.5%. The Mag 7 index climbing higher by 0.8%. Apple, a notable exception, by the way. WWDC underway. Apple down 1.2%. The 10-year 4.48%. The 2-year 4.00%. Spot gold now higher by 0.7%, 33.34 the ounce, and West Texas Intermediate crude oil up 1.2%, 65.37 for a barrel of WTI. So right now the S&P 500 index sitting at 6,019, but Lori Calvasina, head of U.S. equity strategy at RBC Capital Markets, told us this morning on surveillance she's got an S&P target of 57.30.
You know, when you look out longer term, my model for next year, when we sort of input consensus numbers on earnings, different macro variables, you know, there are a few different scenarios we run, but we can get to a range of 6,200 to 6,800. Right. So, you know, we don't feel doom and gloom, but we feel like for where we are right now in the macro backdrop that we have some decent visibility on, we feel like we're kind of fairly valued to a little bit over our skis.
Lori Calvasina of RBC Capital Markets, and again, keeping it all in context, S&P 500 index at 6,019. Tesla hit with a pair of downgrades today from two firms, Argus Research and Baird. It underscores mounting concerns on Wall Street about the EV maker's outlook following last week's clash between CEO Elon Musk and President Trump. Tesla today higher by 2.3%. Recapping, S&P up 0.3%. And for on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News now wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Charlie Pellet. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
Hey, thanks for that update, Charlie. Do appreciate it. Well, trade talks, as we just heard from Charlie, between the U.S. and China stretched on in London. The U.S. signaled a willingness to remove restrictions on some tech exports in exchange for assurances that China is easing limits on rare earth shipments. The meeting began just after 1 p.m. local time. It's expected to extend into the UK evening. It may restart on Tuesday, Carol, if necessary. We got a great voice on this.
We do indeed. Back with us, Dexter Tiff Roberts. He's non-resident senior fellow at the Atlantic Council's Global China Hub. He's also author of Trade War, a weekly newsletter on China's economy. He's also professor of Chinese politics at the University of Montana. He's former Bloomberg Businessweek China bureau chief. He lived in Beijing for 2 decades, covering it all for Businessweek. And he's author of the 2020 book. We've talked to him about this, The Myth of Chinese Capitalism, the Worker, the Factory, and the Future of the World.
Sorry, we're out of time now with the interview.
But this is why you want to talk to him about China. He joins us from Missoula, Montana. Tiff, good to have you back with us. Yeah, these negotiations between the U.S. and China, what for you is what you think we should all have on our radar here?
Well, it's all from the U.S. perspective. As we know, it's all about rare earth exports. We've got ourselves in a situation over a number of years where China absolutely dominates the production and the processing of these crucial rare earths that we need for almost everything. You name it, we need it. We need rare earths, smartphones. Electric vehicles, robotics, missile systems, defense needs as well.
Tiff, if that's the case, and we spoke to Gracelyn Baskrin at CSIS a little earlier in our program. She joined us from South Africa, and we talked specifically about rare earths. But in the context of trade negotiations, and who actually has the leverage, since for the U.S. this is all about rare earths, does that mean that China has the upper hand in your view?
Well, I actually do think China has a little bit more leverage than the U.S., but it's close. We had the numbers earlier this week. Chinese exports disappointed. We saw this dramatic, I think it was 34.5% drop in exports to the U.S. They've been doing a little bit better because they've been selling a lot to Southeast Asia, the EU, and Africa, but not well enough. So it's not like China's not hurting, but I do think on the U.S. side, there's these real fears about inflation if the trade war goes on. We saw the relatively weak job report, and we got something called the midterm elections coming up. And China, as we know, doesn't have any midterm elections ahead.
Well, I love that you went there. And I was going to ask you, Tiff, what about, what is it about the grand kind of Chinese experiment and mission that has happened under President Xi? As you said, there's no midterms. He's pretty well entrenched and ensconced in his position. But what is it about his mission, his great experiment and, kind of goal in creating the Chinese economy that we look at today? What about it works? What doesn't?
Well, first of all, I would just say that grand goal that it's clear Xi Jinping has and has been vocalized and publicized more often in Chinese than English, but they're very clear that they want China to play a dominant role in global supply chains, as they already do, but they want to strengthen that at the high end, and they want to dominate advanced technology. So, first of all, that grand goal that we see out of Beijing, unfortunately, is in direct conflict with what we would like to see in the U.S. So I guess I just say at the outset, we may get some agreements. I think we will out of London, but I'm really skeptical that they're going to last long term for that reason. There's a real difference of opinions, if you will, about who's going to lead in advanced tech and supply chains globally.
Tiff, this is almost an impossible question for any single person to answer, but I think you can probably give as good of a view into this as anybody else. For the last few months, Carol and I have been trying to figure out what exactly is happening on the ground when it comes to the Chinese economy. To what extent is the Chinese economy ahead of the U.S. when it comes to electric vehicles, when it comes to robotics, when it comes to AI? Because over the last few years, what we've learned is that there's, yes, been a property crisis. The consumer is under pressure. There's a debt crisis, certainly, as well, we've reported on extensively. So how would you characterize the Chinese consumer, the Chinese economy, and where the strengths and weaknesses are right now?
Well, there's a real, you've just hit upon it, Tim. There's this real dichotomy. We have seen tremendous success in areas like electric vehicles. There's no question now that they are doing far better than we are and leading the world in terms of affordable and very good electric vehicles. And I saw that last year when I rode in some as well when I was in China. We saw, obviously areas like smartphones. Apple fell out of the top 5 brands in the China market. So there's huge success there. Robotics, again, very, very impressive. Obviously with AI, we saw with the Sputnik moment, as people referred to it, with DeepSeek, an absolutely impressive large language, LLM. So that's the one side. On the other side, you have, you mentioned, you have a very weak consumer market. You have an overhang continuing from the real estate market, which has been so important to the economy, and then also the pandemic. They've really never recovered from it. So we saw both those cited by the OECD earlier this week when they downgraded their forecast for Chinese growth, I think to 4.6% for next year. It's not clear what China's strategy is at this point to actually reverse that and bring confidence back, not just to the household, but also to the private sector as well.
Tiff, what I find really interesting is basically you've got the 2 largest economies in the world wanting to stay or be number 1, right? And what's interesting is I feel like the U.S. is kind of trying to put limitations on the China or telling European allies what you can or can't sell to China. And, it's like, and yet we don't want China to put any restrictions on us. So I'm curious to see how this plays out. And I think a big part of it will be where allies fall. And so what kind of carving up of the world will we see? And who do you expect will ally themselves with China, who with the United States? And does Donald Trump make it better or worse for the U.S. developing the alliances that it really needs?
Well, wonderful and very important question, Carol. If you'd asked me 6 months ago, before January 20th, I think we could see some pretty solid allies in Europe, among some of our real close partners in Asia, Japan, South Korea, Australia. Since January 20th, since the tariffs, the beautiful tariffs that have been imposed and threatened over 50 times, by the way, over 50 different tariffs and adjustments to tariff policy coming out of Washington. I think our alliances are feeling, I'm afraid, a little bit, our allies and our alliances are a bit frayed. So the other thing I just want to mention, China hasn't been sitting still at all. They are very aware, the U.S. has been aware as well, about this almost existential tech and supply chain rivalry between the 2 countries. They've spent the recent years really sort of redirecting the countries, their investment focus. So we see, for example, just take a basic agricultural product. We've seen how they made tremendous strides in lessening their reliance on American soybeans and instead buy the majority now from Brazil. We've seen that across the board. So there's been a real growth. There's been a real growth in exports, Chinese exports, and investment into what we call the global South, and a lessening of the reduction of the relationship between the U.S. and to a lesser degree with the EU. Although the EU is very much in play now, I think China sees that as a real potential ally that they can scoop up.
All right. So if I can just follow just real quickly, Tiff. So then, do you see China allying with a bunch of European nations, and who ultimately is the U.S. ally? Is it Russia? Like, just carve it up for me, if you would.
Well, I certainly hope that's not what happens. I don't think we should be allying with Russia. And Russia, of course, is a pretty insignificant. I mean, it's not insignificant, but economically and in terms of trade, it's a relatively small player. Unlike the EU, obviously. So, I'm hopeful that we've seen some new pragmatism, if you will, I hope, coming out of Washington. There's been a willingness to try to renegotiate some of these initial tariff threats. that were imposed by Washington. So I would hope we'll see, come first of all out of London again, although I'm not sure how long that can stick, but some progress in cooling tensions, and then moving on to some of our other partners. Obviously, there's been the talks with India as well. So I guess I'm not giving you a great straight answer, Carol, but so much is changing so fast.
Yeah.
I do think, just finish with one thought on that. I do think that Trump has made it clear, we know this, of course, that he perceives himself as a deal maker. He wants to cut deals. And he, if necessary, will reduce those tariffs and try to create a better relationship with countries, starting right now in London with China.
Tiff, we've talked a lot about this with other people. We haven't heard your take on it, but we know the president, and he's been public about this. He said he doesn't care if iPhones are made in India. He wants them to be made here in the U.S. He doesn't want them in China. He doesn't want them to be made in India, as Apple has diversified its supply chain. Given what you know about iPhone production, do you believe it's realistic for us to think that Apple could actually build iPhones in the U.S.?
If we want to spend, $5,000 per iPhone, no, I don't think so. I think if he were able to convince iPhone to do that, it's going to hurt all of us. It's certainly going to hurt us, the consumers, in much higher prices. There's no reason for Apple to do that. And even as Apple has fallen out of the top 5 places in the China market, China is an important market for Apple. India is an important market going forward. So there's no reason for Apple to do that. Electric vehicles, that's an interesting tidbit that Trump threw up on the election trail, I think in Iowa, where he talked about welcoming Chinese electric vehicle makers into the U.S. That makes sense. It would be a big step.
You think that could happen? You think we could see that? You think we could see that in the next couple of years?
Definitely a possibility. Trump has indicated he would be open to that.
That would destroy U.S. automakers, no?
Yeah, if maybe take a leaf from the old China model and say we get 50% or 51% of a joint venture, and you have to work with our companies. This is sounds a little crazy, but that's what China did, and it worked very well for them. Maybe the U.S. could try something like that. And Trump, again, he has indicated that he might be open to that. The idea that you would have, big Chinese factories in the U.S. And creating American jobs. Certainly, that's what Europe is doing right now.
All right, we got to leave it there. Hey, Tiff, thank you so much. Good to get some thoughts from you on this situation. Of course, we're going to continue to monitor those talks over in London between U.S. and Chinese officials, which, as we've been talking, could go into the evening as well as into tomorrow. Of course, Tiff Roberts, professor of Chinese politics at the University of Montana, former Bloomberg Businessweek China bureau chief, and also the author of The Myth of Chinese Capitalism. You're listening and watching Bloomberg. We talk about
Yeah, it's 3:21 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. U.S.-China talks in London will continue tomorrow. That word from an official. Traders are glued to their screens amid commercial talks between the U.S. and China. That has been driving stocks higher. Right now, we do have the S&P 500 index very close to session highs, showing a gain now of 13 points at 6,013, up 0.2%. The Dow up 72, up 0.2. NASDAQ up 80. That is a gain of 0.4%. Our Mag 7 index up 0.7%, with the 10-year currently yielding 4.48%. The 2-year 4.00% on the 2-year. Spot gold up $23 the ounce at $33.33, up 0.7%. And West Texas Intermediate crude up 1.2%, $65.33 a barrel. I'm Charlie Pellet. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
Hey, thanks for that update, Charlie. Do appreciate it. From New York to Washington, D.C. we go to the White House, where President Trump is taking questions in the state dining room. Let's listen in.
And we would bring more in if we needed it, because we have to make sure there's going to be law and order. You had a disaster happening, and they now admit it was a disaster. I watched the chief yesterday, who's a good man, by the way, and he said, well, we're lucky we did this because they were overwhelmed. You saw what was happening. So we did the right thing. Everybody agrees to that. But you have a governor who let the city burn down, didn't want water to be sent down to him. I sent billions of gallons of water. I wanted to do it in the first term. He wouldn't do it over, I don't know, they have environmental reasons, but there were no environmental reasons. I think it's just a political philosophy. But it's lucky for the people in Los Angeles and in California that we did what we did. We got it just in time. It's still simmering a little bit, but not very much. Yep.
And what crime has he committed that would warrant his arrest? What crime has Governor Newsom committed?
A crime has he committed?
Yeah, to warrant his arrest, as you
I think his
suggested earlier.
primary crime is running for governor, because he's done such a bad job. What he's done to that state is like what Biden did to this country. And that's pretty bad. It's the wrong philosophy. Thousands, hundreds of thousands of illegal immigrants, many of them prisoners. They're taking up your health care. They're taking up your space in schools. They're taking up your hospital. And in many cases, they're criminals. And we have to do something about it. And we're doing something about it. I want to thank the incredible patriots of ICE and Tom Homan, who has been incredible, and Kristi Noem, likewise incredible. The job they're doing. And it's like an unforced error. There was no reason for this. 21 million people were allowed into our country, and many of those people were criminals. And it's a shame. It's a shame. But we're getting them out. And I will say, I think it's a 95-5 issue, just like so many other issues, 95-5. And the Democrats lost an election in a landslide because they're on the wrong side of the issues. I mean, it's not even conceivable that somebody would do the kind of things that he did. And then, you talk about projects. They want to build a train going from San Francisco to L.A., and it's costing hundreds of billions of dollars more than they thought it was going to cost. It's not even believable. To Brad and to people sitting here, would you believe that a train, it was going to cost X dollars, and it might be 100 times X?
Would have paid for this for about 50 million American children.
You're right.
50 million American children instead of a 3-mile train track that never got built.
We could have put Lincoln in charge with no experience. He would have done a good job. I guarantee you that. All right, please, Peter.
Mr. President, have you gotten an update from your negotiating?
Thank you, President Trump. So it seems like Gavin Newsom likes the attention that he's getting right now from you. Yeah, it seems like he does. If you look at recent history, somebody who was running for president, you, who got arrested and had a mugshot, you could make the argument that politically that wound up helping you. Are you worried at all at this moment that talking about him getting arrested could be helpful to his political prospects? Because a lot of people think he wants to be sitting right where you are.
Well, in my case, it was a witch hunt, and everybody knew it. And I was able to explain that during the process. Otherwise, I wouldn't be sitting here right now. And it was a total witch hunt. It's proven to be a witch hunt, and you see what's happened. In his case, it really is very obvious. You look at what's happened between the fires. I could name 10 things right now. We talk about the trains. We talk about all of the costs in California. You talk about all of the people that are flowing and destroying life for everyone else. So no, I don't think it's going to help him. I think it's actually very bad for him.
And right around the time that we were walking in here, the governor and the state attorney general said that they're going to sue you for sending the National Guard in. They're saying there's no invasion, there's no rebellion. The president is trying to manufacture chaos and crisis on the ground for his own political ends. Federalizing the California National Guard is an abuse of the president's authority under law.
Well, you know, it's interesting. You watched the same clips as I did. Cars burning all over the place, people rioting. And by the way, we stopped it. We were able to make it much better, but it still looked pretty bad. And in watching clips last night, people were saying this is really a big problem. And until we went in, if we didn't do the job, that place would be burning down just like the houses burned down. They were in big trouble last night, Peter. You know it. And the night before, and the night before that. And I feel we had no choice. I don't want to see happen what happened so many times in this country. I watched Minneapolis burn. Look at what happened in so many different parts of California. You take a look at what happened in San Diego. There's so many different places where we let it burn. We wanted to be politically correct. We wanted to be nice. We wanted to be nice to the criminal. And what you're doing is destroying the fabric of our life in this country. No, we did the right thing. We've been given credit by people that I would least suspect. Why I would say that some of the people that came in and said, thank goodness, they said, some of them, thank God that Trump got involved. And I'm very happy I got involved. And I think Gavin, in his own way, is probably happy I got involved. Yeah, go ahead, Peter.
What do you make of the fact that he says you want a civil war on the streets of America?
No, it's just the opposite. I don't want a civil war. A civil war would happen if you left it to people like him. And I liked him. You know, I always got along with him. Never had a problem with him. But he's grossly incompetent. Okay.
London. Have you gotten an update from your team in London negotiating?
What? Louder.
Have you gotten an update from your team in London negotiating the China trade talks?
We are doing well with China. China's not easy, just like your home country is not easy there. I think we're doing very well. They're over there now. I'm only getting good reports. It's a little early, but they'll be calling in soon. In fact, probably when I get back, I'll have my first call from them. We want to open up China. And if we don't open up China, maybe we won't do anything. But we want to open up China. It'll be a great thing for China, a great thing for the rest of the world.
Are you willing to lift export controls when it comes to China? Did you give your negotiators any sort of limitation?
We're going to see. Look, China has been ripping off the United States for many years. Nobody charged them 10 cents. No president had the courage to charge China for whatever reason. They didn't want to do it. I took in hundreds of billions of dollars. I put on tariffs on China when I got in first term. And we took in hundreds of billions of dollars. And then I did it again, but I did it for a lot of others. If you look at the stats, the deficit last month was cut in half. Everybody was shocked. I wasn't shocked. I think a lot of the people at this table weren't, because they saw the billions of dollars that were pouring in, and the tariffs hadn't even started yet, just about. They weren't cars. They were in some countries at a very minor level. And we cut the deficit in half, and it was a big story a couple of days ago. They said, I don't believe, one of the announcers on a business network went wild, said, I can't believe these numbers. Those numbers are good. The numbers are going to be very good. I think we're going to have a great 4 years. You know, we had the greatest economy in history during my 4 years. I think this one's going to blow it away. Yeah.
Mr. President,
go ahead,
do you have a message for Greta Thunberg, and did she come up on your call with the Prime Minister today?
Well, she's a strange person. She's a young, angry person. I don't know if it's real anger. It's hard to believe, actually, but I saw what happened. She's certainly different. Anger management. I think she has to go to an anger management class.
Do you
That's
think she was
primary recommendation for
Was
her.
she kidnapped by Israel, as she says? Was she kidnapped?
I find it. I think Israel has enough problems without kidnapping Greta Thunberg.
And secondly, are you going to
Is that what she said? She was kidnapped by
She did
Israel?
say that, yes, sir. Are you going to get rid of the Tesla and the Starlink service that you have here at the White House?
No, I haven't heard that. I mean, I may move the Tesla around a little bit, but I don't think we'll be doing that with Starlink. It's a good service.
Where are you going to move it to? Move it around, what do you mean?
I have a lot of locations.
Actually, about the Tesla.
I had so many locations, I don't know what to do with them all.
About that Tesla, did you ever see Elon Musk get physical with the Treasury Secretary?
No, I didn't.
And I tried to ask.
They did have an argument, but I didn't see a lot of physicality there.
And there was this New York Times report that he did not want to talk about, Elon Musk, that alleged that he, towards the end of his time in the White House, was blurring the lines between recreational use of drugs and medicinal. Do you think he ever had drugs here at the White House?
I really don't know. I don't think so. I hope not. Look, I wish him well. You understand. We had a good relationship, and I just wish him well. Very well, actually. Yeah.
About aid in Gaza, you mentioned now the flotilla. Do you have a response at all about Israel intercepting this boat? And can you give us an update on what's happening to the entry of aid into Gaza right now? We've had people being shot by Israeli forces who are trying to get aid from the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation. Yes.
Gaza right now is in the midst of a massive negotiation between us and Hamas and Israel, and Iran actually is involved. And we'll see what's going to happen with Gaza. We want to get the hostages back. That's all I can tell you. Yeah, please, in the back.
If I can go back to California briefly. You had said yesterday when asked by reporters that it was not an insurrection taking place, but then on True Social a bit later, you had said they were insurrectionists. After what you've seen
You're talking about in L.A.?
Yes, sir, in L.A.
I wouldn't call it quite an insurrection, but it could have led to an insurrection. I mean, that was a lot of harm that was going on last night. I watched it very closely. And it was amazing that the job that the National Guard did. And by the way, the police were working very hard also. But, you know, the police are given instructions to be politically correct. I said, no, you don't have to be politically correct. You have to do the job.
And on Elon Musk, do you plan to speak to him on the phone anytime soon? I know some...
Which one?
On Elon Musk, do you plan to speak to him on the phone anytime soon?
I haven't really thought about it, actually. I would imagine he wants to speak to me. I would think so. If I were him, I'd want to speak to me. And maybe he was already called. You'd have to ask him whether or not he's already called. But I'd have no problem with it.
If he calls you, you pick up and speak to him?
Well, I don't want to say that, but I would imagine he'd want to talk to me.
You were supposed to get a counter
Yeah, please.
proposal. You were supposed to get a counter proposal from Iran today. Have you gotten that proposal? And what is the main impediment?
We have a meeting with Iran on Thursday, so we're going to wait till Thursday.
And what's the main impediment to getting a deal?
Well, they're just asking for things that you can't do. They don't want to give up what they have to give up. You know what that is. They seek enrichment. We can't have enrichment. We want just the opposite. And so far, they're not there. I hate to say that, because the alternative is a very, very dire one, but they're not there. They have given us their thoughts on the deal, and I said, it's just not acceptable.
Was the main topic for Prime Minister Netanyahu today when you spoke?
I would say, yeah. I don't know what else. I can talk about the weather.
Well, you can talk about Lebanon also, sir.
Pretty much
The Lebanon.
That's the main topic.
Lebanon is a ceasefire in Lebanon.
Lebanon
Yes.
also, yeah. We did.
What about Lebanon, sir?
Well, Lebanon's working very hard. They have a great new ambassador that I put there. Man, I know very well. He's very smart. I didn't even know he was Lebanese. And I said, why would you want Lebanon? He said, I was born there. I love it. I love the people. I said, it's very dangerous going to Lebanon. There are some ambassadorships that are wonderful. There are some that are dangerous. I said, Michel, his name is. It's a he, Michel, very elegant man. And I said, why would you want this? And he said, because I love my country and I love those people. I said, it's very dangerous. He goes, I don't care. This is not a man that lived on danger. He's a very successful man from here. And he wanted to be the ambassador despite probably a very dangerous situation he's going into. You see what's going on. But I had great respect for that. He loves that country. He loves it. He was born there. He loves the country, yeah.
Mr. President,
You've got a big, beautiful parade coming up on Saturday.
We do.
What's your biggest expectations for that? Then I've got a second question in regards to Gavin Newsom. Go ahead and talk about the big, beautiful parade.
It's such a, thank you, Brian. It's such a, I think, important moment for this country. 2 weeks ago, I was calling people and back and forth with leaders, including President Putin, including French president, including lots of different people. And all of them said, we're celebrating victory in World War II. And I said, wow, isn't that amazing? We're the only one that wasn't celebrating, and we're the one that won the war. Now, Russia did help. They did lose 51 million people, in all fairness. People would say, oh, he's sticking up for Russia. No, they lost 51 million people. And, can't forget that. But France was celebrating. And as you know, Hitler made a speech at the Eiffel Tower. But when I spoke to President Macron, he said, oh, we are celebrating the great victory of World War II. And I think that's great that he was doing it. But we're the one that won it, and we weren't celebrating. I said to myself, isn't that crazy? And I think it's time for us to celebrate a little bit. We've had a lot of victories. We won 2 world wars, and then we go out and change the name of the forts where we won the wars. You go out, we win world wars from Fort Robert E. Lee, from Fort Bragg, from all the different forts. And what do? We change the name of the forts because we want to be politically correct. So a lot of them were changing back. You probably noticed Fort Bragg and others. But I think it's a time to celebrate our military. We've rebuilt our military largely. Little low on ammunition. That's because it goes out very fast to other countries, one in particular. But we'll get that back very quickly. But we have a military the likes of which nobody has. Nobody comes close. We have the best equipment in the world. We make the best equipment in the world. There's no military like our military. We showed that with ISIS. I was told by the television generals it would take 4 years to win, and we did it in 3 weeks. And it was headed by General Raisin Kane, who's now the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. He's great. Just left him. No, I think it's time that we celebrate. And I sort of have to laugh at these people. Well, you're going to spend a lot of money. A lot of that money is being paid for by me and people that make donations. I don't know if you know that. A lot of it won't even come out of the military. I think I can say that, Susie, right? We have people putting up money to do it. Not that it's necessary, because I think it's a great expenditure. We have many tanks. We have all sorts of new ones and very old ones, old from World War I and World War II. It's really a celebration of the Army. So the Army is a year older than the country. So next year we celebrate 250 years, but we're celebrating the Army on Flag Day. And it's not my birthday. It is my birthday, but I'm not celebrating my birthday. I'm celebrating Flag Day. It happens to be the same day, so I take a little heat. But Flag Day is the appropriate date. And we're celebrating 250 years of the Army, a great service. And remember, think of it. We won so much. We won World War I, World War II, so much else. And then we became politically correct. But I can only tell you that I was told that ISIS would take anywhere from 4 to 5 years, and we did it in 3 weeks. You were there, you watched, right? We have the greatest military in the world. Nobody can beat us. As long as we have our right leadership, nobody can beat us. If we have stupid people running it, like you had in Afghanistan, when you look at that, first of all, Afghanistan should have been an easy victory as a war, but we were so sad the way we fought it, so ridiculous. We fight not to win, but we didn't used to be that way. And we're celebrating, because I think the day in Afghanistan was the saddest period of time in the history of our country. That was a Biden mess with bad generals like Milley and others. They were bad. They were incompetent generals. I know all the good ones and the bad ones. We got rid of most of the bad ones. But it was time to celebrate, and that's what we're doing. So it's on June 14th, and it's going to be a parade the likes of which I don't know if we've ever had a parade like that. It's going to be incredible. We have even though it's the Army, we have a lot of those Army airplanes flying over the top, and we have tanks all over the place, and we have thousands and thousands of soldiers going to bravely march down the streets. It's going to be a beautiful day, I think. and we're going to celebrate our country.
You spoke of leadership, and real quickly, speaking of Gavin Newsom, is he the right leader for California, considering how massive their economy is and all these U.S. investments coming in? Is he the right governor and leader for the future of California and for
I
U.S.
don't think
investments?
he is. I mean, I think he's done a terrible job. And, you know, he's a guy, I always got along with him. You look at his past statements about me. I was a great president. I always took care of California, you know, all that. But I'm just talking on results. You look, you know, he has the advantage of beautiful weather, maybe the best weather of any state when you think about it. Beautiful weather, beautiful ocean, beautiful everything. You have all the advantages, and he didn't take advantage of that. And he's let people come in by the millions who are overrunning your hospitals, your education system, and your police. Your police are being overrun. Look at what's happened. He should only be happy I sent in the military, because if I didn't send them in, you would have had a problem there, the likes of which we haven't seen in a long time. Yeah, please. Thank you, Brian, very much.
Supersonic flight.
Supersonic?
Yes, sir. I know you just signed an executive order on it. Do you want to see a supersonic Air Force One in the next 10 years or so?
Oh, well, I don't care too much about that, but I would like to see, you know, if you think about it, flight, the word flight's an interesting word, but it's probably the only category where we've actually gone backwards, because we used to have the Concorde, and we could fly to London, Brad, very quickly and nicely. And today it takes you 2 times and 3 times as long. It's the only thing where we've regressed. By the way, the Concorde, to my way of thinking, to this day, Michael, because you're very much into aesthetics, I know, but to this day was one of the most beautiful pieces of art I've ever seen. It was a piece of art, the beauty of the Concorde. It was the most beautiful plane, but it was you know, got you there in half the time. Now you spend a lot of time, and there's no reason for it. Because, you know, they have the sonic boom. It's not a huge problem, but they have the sonic boom thing pretty well figured out. The technology changes, the change in the skin, the change in weight, all of the other things. There's no reason why we shouldn't do great. So we are making it possible for them to do supersonic and get us back on the track. I mean, think of it, 30 years ago, we actually had planes that flew much faster than we do now. It took you half the time to get to a location. So we've regressed, and we're going to progress.
Mr. President, Mr. President?
Sort of an amazing thing, isn't it, though? We've gone backwards. On Wall Street, they haven't done that. If Goldman Sachs was like that, you wouldn't have Goldman Sachs anymore.
Mr. President, are you planning to deploy Marines? Are you planning to deploy Marines in California to address the situation in Los Angeles? Are you going to deploy Marines in California?
We'll see what happens. I mean, I think we have it very well under control. I think it would have been a very bad situation. It was heading in the wrong direction. It's now heading in the right direction. And we hope to have the support of Gavin, because Gavin's the big beneficiary as we straighten out his problems. I mean, his state is a mess. And I'd like to get somebody involved in the rail, because, look, personally, it should have never been built, because you can fly there for $2, and what are you doing? They're doing that. You could drive, you could do lots of different things. You know, if they did a study, if you gave every passenger the finest limousine service in the history of our world, the most expensive chauffeur-driven, white-glove limousine service back and forth, we would have saved billions of dollars as opposed to building this monstrosity that's going up. And I've never seen anything. You know, I've seen cost overruns. I'm a person, I've always done well on cost overruns. I don't have them. But I will tell you, I have never seen cost overruns. You see them where they're 20% more, 50%, 100% more. These are thousands of percent. Nobody even knows. They have no idea. And it was supposed to be from San Francisco to Los Angeles. Well, they just made it way outside of Los Angeles, where it's stopping in the middle of, I don't want to say nowhere, because I happen to like one of those little cities very much, but it's way short of the destination. And our government is saying, you know, why are we involved in this thing? It's been handled so badly. Before him, but he really blew it. So, you know, all right, one more question.
Speak to any of the discussions that were had there and the purpose of that retreat, your time at Camp David.
On what?
Your time at Camp David. Can you speak to what discussions were had there and the purpose of that retreat?
Well, I don't want to speak to discussions. I mean, I told you what we were there for a little bit. We had discussions on many topics. We had a group of people, a large group of people, including generals and admirals and lots of others. And all I can say is our country's in great shape. We're in great shape economically. The bill that Mike and Jason and all the people are working on is going to be, I think, amazing. I think it's going to be one of the most important pieces of legislation we've ever had in this country. It's going to do things that you wouldn't believe. We're going to, I have a very simple phrase. We ran an election on very simple words: make America great again. That's what we're doing. We're making it great. We're making it safe. We're making it beautiful. And we're making it very wealthy again. Wealth is okay. You need wealth to take care of lots of other people. We have to make our country better. It has to heal from 4 years of abuse. Our country was abused badly by a very incompetent person and a group of people that weren't incompetent, but they were radical left lunatics. And they ran the country with an auto pen. And I hope that law enforcement's looking at that very seriously. That's like a takeover of our country in a certain way, because this guy had no idea what he was doing. You saw that during the debate. You saw that in other cases. I mean, he had no idea. I saw it years ago. By the way, 40 years ago, he had no. He was bad 40 years ago. We're not just talking about. And they always like to say age, but it's not age. I know people 88, 89, 92. Bernie Marcus, who just passed away, was 95. I spoke to him a year before. He was 100%. It's not age, it's something else. But whatever it is, you can't have that in this country. The damage he's done to this country is unbelievable. But the good news is we've got much of it fixed already, and the rest of it will happen. Thank you all very much. Thank you.
Well, there you have it. President Trump live at the White House in the state dining room, wrapping up a Q&A session with reporters. In the meantime, a redhead crossing the Bloomberg terminal. You see it right there at the bottom of the screen. If you're watching us on YouTube or Bloomberg Originals, 500 Marines have been mobilized to respond to the LA protest. That is on CNN. We did hear the president, who was asked if he would deploy Marines to California. He said, quote, "We'll have to see," though CNN now reporting that 500 Marines have been mobilized to respond to those LA protests. The president also saying he would bring in more National Guard if needed in Los Angeles. He also said he wouldn't call it quite an insurrection. He was asked specifically about Governor Gavin Newsom, and he said that he is not the right leader for California, though he did also later say, "We think we have it under control in California." In the meantime, California is suing the Trump administration for deploying the state's National Guard in Los Angeles to quell unrest over the president's immigration raids. With more and an update on the California lawsuit, we bring in Bloomberg News legal reporter Malathi Nayak. She joins us here in our San Francisco bureau. Malathi, what do we know about this lawsuit?
So the lawsuit hasn't been officially filed yet, but it is coming sometime this afternoon, according to the Attorney General of California, Rob Bonta. So we're waiting for it to drop, but we know so far that the main argument California is making is that the part of the U.S. code that Trump is using to send National Guard troops out to California, according to California, that sort of use of the law is unconstitutional and unlawful. So what they're saying is, if there is some sort of an invasion or some sort of a rebellion or a situation where local authorities don't have the capabilities to handle such a situation, it's only then when the National Guard can be sent in. And they're saying in this particular instance, Trump is abusing his authority.
Malti, we are reminding everyone of a headline that just crossed the Bloomberg, and this is coming from CNN, that 500 Marines have been mobilized to respond to the LA protests. This is coming after we just came off of a live press conference at the White House, and the president was asked about the use of Marines, and he said, "We'll have to see." So timing is kind of interesting here. Again, this is reporting from CNN, and we're continuing to monitor that. But Marines being sent into a state, what do we know about that? Is that an escalation? Is that allowed by the United States? Give us some context. And I'm just curious, again, on a legal level, whether or not the president is allowed to do this.
Yeah, in this particular situation, at least when you look at California's argument, what they're saying is that, there are certain conditions when you can actually get to that level, or where some sort of where a reaction to a certain sort of insurrection or sort of issues on the ground can be responded to at a certain level. But in this case, what they're saying here in California is that those conditions haven't been met, and that, local troops and folks on the ground are enough to sort of respond to what's going on. So if you saw the original order, I think they were planning to send at least 2,000 troops out in the next 60 days. And the AG confirmed that so far there's 300 or so on the ground. And he said that he won't be surprised if they send in more in coming weeks, because there is a 60-day period that the order has. So yeah, we'll have to see how things unfold. But this is sort of an unprecedented or sort of, unusual or rare sort of situation where this law is being used to sort of respond to a situation in this way. We have seen the National Guard, for instance, which serves both federal and state interests, respond during emergencies like hurricanes or like, the COVID-19 pandemic response. So yeah, this is sort of an interesting situation unfolding, and we'll have to see, once this suit is filed and there are arguments made in court, we'll have to see what finally happens in terms of, some of, whether this whether this law is vague or not. Those sort of questions will sort of be answered in court.
All right, we're talking with Malti Nayak. She is Bloomberg News legal reporter right here in our San Francisco, where Tim and I are as well. Having said that, there's a lot going on between California specifically and the White House. California is suing the Trump administration for deploying the state's National Guard in LA. We know that I think it's day 4 in terms of kind of the tense situation that we are seeing in LA specifically. Again, the protests were over some of the president's immigration raids that have been going on. So this is going back and forth. Malti, what I want to ask you specifically is who California is suing. Is it the government? Give me an idea of exactly what we know about this lawsuit.
Got it. So it looks like the Department of Defense is going to be the defendant here. So, because it was the Department of Defense that sent out the troops, to the ground. So it'll be a suit against the Trump administration, specifically the Department of Defense. And the suit actually, so far we know that the suit will be filed later in the afternoon, and we'll definitely see more details. But we know as of now that the Department of Defense is the defendant.
Malti, what happens if the state of California actually prevails in this? And look, I don't want us to play it out too much in terms of a potential constitutional crisis or the administration not necessarily following what the courts say, but I think it's fair to say we have seen that happen in the past, that the courts haven't necessarily had the same amount of power with this administration that courts in previous administrations have had.
Got it. Yeah, they are filing this case in California federal court, in the Northern District, I believe, where there are judges who are pretty experienced in sort of dealing with these sort of, state law versus federal law issues. And I think, what we'll see first is California, after the suit, will file some sort of a temporary relief or an injunction to sort of immediately block this this order from, and then potentially we could see maybe some of the troops or that order will then lead to the Trump administration potentially having to withdraw some of these troops. So yeah, we'll have to wait for that first step in terms of the suit being filed. Also, the sort of first fight in which California will seek some sort of temporary relief in the form of an injunction. And once we have that, we'll know what will unfold here. But it looks like, this is sort of a very rare situation. We'll have to see how it will play out in court. But, the AG of California today at a press conference with reporters seemed pretty confident that the argument they're making is strong. And that's, that this particular move is an abuse of power because it's unconstitutional and unlawful, and because the conditions to sort of deliver a response at this level, at this sort of escalated level, those conditions are met, and that's what California's AG Rob Bonta and Newsom, Governor Gavin Newsom are arguing.
And just to clarify, Malti, the case has not been filed yet, correct?
That's right. We're expecting it to come down anytime. So yeah, we're definitely keeping an eye out to sort of learn more about the arguments. But we know so far from the press conference and details shared by California officials this morning that it's coming, and that this is going to be a big fight. We've already seen, I think this is going to be the 24th suit, by California against the Trump administration in 19 weeks. So this is going to be a big one, just given the way the situation is unfolding in LA on the ground currently.
All right, really appreciate the update. Bloomberg News legal reporter Malti Nayak joining us right here in San Francisco. All right, folks, we are just about 3.5 minutes away from the closing bell. We've got stocks just off their best levels of the session. So we've been watching the trade here a little bit higher, just up about 0.2% on the S&P 500. It's just about a 10-point gain. Looking at the Dow Jones Industrial Average, call it flat on the day, percentage-wise, a gain of about 36 points. NASDAQ 100 just up about 0.2%, again, up about 47 points. So higher on the day, but there's a lot kind of brewing and simmering behind all of that.
Hey, like what's going on between the U.S. and China? Trade talks between the U.S. and China will continue into a second day. This according to a U.S. official. The two sides are looking to ease tensions over shipments of tech and rare earth elements. Here's what the president said to reporters earlier. We are doing well with China. I'm only getting good reports. All right, stay tuned, because coming up next, we are going to be joined by our TV team for our cross-platform coverage, radio, TV, YouTube, and Bloomberg Originals to count you down to the close. Bloomberg's The Closing Bell starts right now.
The Closing Bell, Bloomberg's comprehensive cross-platform coverage of the U.S. market close, starts right now.
And right now we are 2 minutes away from the end of the trading day. Romaine Bostic alongside Alex Steele taking you through to that closing bell with a global simulcast. It starts right now. Scarlet Fu back in the TV studio. Carol Masser and Tim Stenovic, they're not in the radio booth. They're somewhere out in the wilds of, I don't know, where are you? Are you both in the same building?
San Francisco, look at the bridge.
San Francisco, you got a bridge. But are you together, or what's happening here? Anyway,
So
welcome to our audience.
I got a bridge behind me. Carol's got a tower behind her. So, but we are just. This is the magic of TV, guys. The magic of steps away from me.
They're like right next to each other. They're like you and me right now.
We're right next to the magic of TV. No,
Yeah.
we're in different rooms.
It's pretty amazing.
Don't get in my head. What do you make of the? I don't know which one of you wants to pick up here. What do you make of this rally, quote unquote?
It's not much of a rally. Like, you look at the S&P 500, I feel like as many names are up as are down. But if you're a member of the semiconductor world, you're doing pretty well. The SOX is up about 2%, and I think just nearly all of the names that are in that index, guys, are higher today. 29 of 30 names are actually showing some gains here.
I'm squarely focused on what's going on between the U.S. and China in London. We are reporting that trade talks are going to continue on Tuesday. The president just moments ago said, we're doing well with China. China's not easy, but I'm only getting good reports.
Yeah, the fact that discussions are continuing into tomorrow is a good sign, and there haven't been any real negative headlines. The other story, of course, we're keeping an eye on is what's going on with Apple and the Worldwide Developers Conference. Not too far from where you and Carol are, Tim, but no real surprises out of that event today.
Yeah. A lot more style than substance, right?
There you go.
All right. As we get the closing bells here in New York, we'll get to some of the individual movers in a second. Apple closing out the day lower. The Dow Jones Industrial Average relatively unchanged on the day. It takes a while for these numbers to settle, but it looks like it's going to move lower by less than 10 points on the day. The S&P 500 higher by less than 10 points on the day, about 5 points higher than where it started, and that is a gain of about 1/10%. The NASDAQ up about 0.3% on the day. And let's take a look at the Russell 2000, a gain for the Russell 2000 of about 12 points, or about 0.6%.
All right, looking at the S&P 500, guys, as I mentioned earlier, kind of an even split. A few more names to the upside, Scarlett. 261 names in the S&P 500 actually gaining ground today, 239 to the downside.
All right, let's take a look at the IMAP, which looks at the 11 sectors in the S&P 500. Pretty even split there as well. 6 sectors in the red. The biggest laggards here are utilities and financials, each down about 0.5% to 0.6%. Staples also lower by 0.25%. And the outperformer of the day is consumer discretionary, really led by the auto-related stocks, up more than 1%. Materials and tech are also just finishing up in the green.
All right, guys, let's get to some of the individual gainers. I mentioned that semiconductors really outperforming as a whole and as a group today. What's interesting is there's a name we don't talk a lot about, ticker's ENTG, Integris. And we saw this one being the top gainer in the semiconductor index, $11.8 billion market cap. It's a semi-manufacturing company. And I was looking for some news like throughout the day and really didn't see anything specifically, although reader interest in social was unusually high, though the number of news stories about the company was no greater than average. So no notable news, but the stock was up about 4%. So I thought it was just kind of interesting to see that one being such an outperformer. Actually, it's up 7.6%, today. So quite an outperformer. Qualcomm, staying in the semi space, that one was up more than 4% in today's session. The chip maker reached an agreement to buy AlphaWave for about $2.4 billion. That was a cash deal. They are doing this to expand its technology for artificial intelligence. So again, an AI play. The deal will be subject to regulatory and shareholder approval. It is, though, is expected to close in the first quarter of 2026. AlphaWave's board unanimously recommending the cash offer, so they're already all in on this. And then Synchrony Financial, got to mention that one as well. Off its highs of the day, was up 4% at one point, but finishing with a 2.7% gain, so some outperformance there. This is as Walmart's credit cards will be issued by Synchrony Financial, with OnePay offering co-branded and private label cards in the U.S. later on this year. So nice little tie-up there.
They did. It was something about the way they do contracts, basically.
Oh, exciting.
Good talk.
Okay. All right, let's go to Apple. I've been watching shares of Apple all day as the company held its Worldwide Developers Conference in Cupertino. We spoke to Ed Ludlow there a little earlier. Shares were up as much as 1% earlier in the session, but ended up falling 1.2%. Perhaps investors learned more, or maybe they were left wanting more. The company is introducing Liquid Glass. This is a new Vision iOS-like design language across its different platforms. Not a surprise if you've been paying attention to what Mark Gurman has been writing for weeks at this point, and perhaps that's why it was kind of a sell the news event out of Cupertino. Also, the iPhone is getting a revamped phone and camera apps that focus on simplicity. Lots more news there. I encourage you to check out our live blog for more information about what was unveiled. Also, you know about merger Mondays or media Mondays. This is a media Monday, but it's more like a divorce when it comes to some traditional media. We're talking about Warner Brothers Discovery. Shares of Warner Brothers Discovery falling about 3% on the session today. This after the company said that it was separating into 2 different companies. It's the global networks business, so that'll include entertainment, sports, and dozens of cable TV brands such as CNN, TNT, and TBS. Then it will hold a 20% stake in the other company, that's the streaming and studios business. That'll be headed by David Zaslav, and it'll essentially it'll use proceeds from that entity as a way to cut debt, the company said in a statement earlier. Shares were up earlier in the session by as much as 13%, but ended up falling by about 3%. And finally, shares of Robinhood. Do you guys remember last week there was all this speculation about Robinhood being included in the S&P 500 as a result of the quarterly rebalancing? So you had companies like AppLovin as well surge. Robinhood surged last week 13%. And then look what happened Friday. The markets closed, and then, S&P indices, or Dow Jones Industries rather, come out and say, no, we're not actually changing it up at all. S&P Dow Jones Industries said, we're leaving the S&P 500 the same. Robinhood fell by about 2% today as a result.
And Applied Digital down 6%. A lot of people thought they would make it in as well.
Yeah.
Ouch, ouch, all those rumors. All right, let's take a look at the bond market here, guys. So buying pretty much across the curve, that front end down by about 3 basis points. So today's not the big mover, but tomorrow you get the 3-year, then the 10-year Wednesday, and then you have 30-year on Thursday. All told, you're looking at $119 billion with the 30-year rate around an 18-year high, clearly off that level, but around that area. That's what many investors are going to be watching, guys.
All right, so let's get to something that's happening right now. For those who have recently graduated from college, it's not such a great job market, even if you've got good qualifications. And apparently a couple things are going on. In some cases, it's just companies like not looking to hire. And the other thing is AI is replacing some of the jobs that maybe normally went to college grads.
Yeah, Claire Ballantyne writing about this. So even a short period of unemployment can have long-term effects when it comes to a graduate's career. You could lose a potential of $22,000 over the next decade. So it's a really stressful time for those who are just starting their careers. There's a lot of disruption happening right now. It's kind of scary when you think about the job market that these new folks are entering. But I guess, I don't know. I mean, I guess the question is, oftentimes we do enter the job markets in periods of turmoil. I mean, I think 'a lot of folks remember entering the job market during the Great Recession.
But is this supposed to be
recovery
worse?
there?
I mean, I saw some of the data that it's something like 85% of basically the increase that we've seen on the unemployment rate. That's largely, Scarlett, because of new entrants.
Right, like college graduates, for instance. And of course, the class of 2025, when they are applying to college, the big thing was to be a computer engineering major. And those are the jobs, that's the major where they're having a really, really hard time finding jobs because entry-level jobs in that field just isn't opening up. And a lot of that is because of AI. And like Carol said, companies holding off until they get more clarity.
Now, if you do get a job and you're asked to go into the office, you actually may not have a desk.
What?
And that is the topic of our next discussion here. So you know how banks...
Nice segue.
Thank you. Bank executives are pushing for return to office work, right? But banks are now facing apparently a shortage of desks, particularly in London because of the real estate squeeze.
I love this story. And it's not just banks in London, it's banks here. We had the same issue with the federal government here in the United States when the Trump administration asked all these people to come back.
There wasn't enough toilet paper.
Yeah, and there weren't enough desks. I mean, so it's like, you know, come on, guys, infrastructure, get up.
Can you imagine having to hot desk all the time? You know, a lot of people have to bring everything with them, their laptop, their shoes, their books with them, whatever, if they need to consult any books because they're not digital. But like you're bringing a little rolly suitcase with you every time you go into the office.
You couldn't do that because if you've seen your desk, you and I could not do that because our desks
let's
are
not
hot
talk about our
messes.
desks. Yeah.
But if you look at, say, Kayla, like our booker, like she's good to go. Like she can just go to different desks.
Who has the cleanest desk of
well, I know it's not us.
100% it's not me, Carol, or
That's
Scarlett. The
for
three
sure.
of us are out. I think it's just a Tim versus Romaine situation.
I think Tim probably has this beat, right?
I don't know.
Did you guys? I got some bad news a little earlier today. Carol and I are flying to San Diego tonight
That's bad
for a
news?
conference.
Okay.
You know, the bad news is we're sitting next to each other.
Oh, wow.
And Carol has this policy. She does not sit next to me on an airplane. She refuses to do it.
Interesting.
Some reason.
Is it just him or is it like a co-anchor?
No, it's actually everyone. Don't you like need your space on the plane?
That makes
Ask
sense.
all of my colleagues. I'm just like, I love you, but when I'm on a plane.
Can I just say, a couple months ago, I ended up sitting next to Michael McKee, our Bloomberg International economics correspondent, and kudos to Mike. He did not say a word to me. I did not say a word to him. We said our hellos, and then we just ignored each other, and I really appreciate you for that, man. I love you.
Well, apparently it's a thing.
That's my version of it.
That's
all right.
hysterical.
All right, guys. That's a wrap. Our cross-platform coverage, coast-to-coast coverage.
That's why
in
they're
fact,
still out there. What
Going
is
to
this?
the zoo.
It's like our new West Coast down here.
I might change my flight. Let Carol go by herself. That's what we're going to do.
I might walk to San Diego. All right, guys. We will see you again on Wednesday.
Maybe.
This is Bloomberg Business Week Daily, reporting from the magazine that helps global leaders stay ahead, with insight on the people, companies, and trends shaping today's complex economy, plus global business, finance, and tech news as it happens. Bloomberg Business Week Daily with Carol Masser and Tim Stenivek, live on Bloomberg Radio, television, YouTube, and Bloomberg Originals.
It is Bloomberg Business Week Daily. Carol and I are out here in San Francisco getting ready for our trip to San Diego. We're going to be at a Cisco conference all day tomorrow. Tune in, 3 to 5 p.m. Wall Street time. I'm told there's a beach there, Carol, right where this conference is. That's all I know.
You say it like you don't know. He's already said, at 5:30, you know where I'm going to be. Or for our show call, where I'm going to be, that's where he's going to be.
Walking on the beach.
Walking on the beach.
It's okay. It's good. Important to get your steps in, okay?
Yes,
It's important to get your steps in. Hey, speaking of health, Redhead crossing the Bloomberg terminal. RFK Jr., the Secretary of Health and Human Services, is removing all members of the CDC panel that advises on vaccines. Once again, Redhead crossing the Bloomberg terminal. Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is removing all members of a CDC panel that advises on vaccines.
All right, so certainly something we're watching. There's a lot of stuff going on, certainly out of the nation's capital. And one of the things we wanted to do about 24 hours, like go back to Friday around this time. This is a story we were talking about a lot. And that was the U.S. Supreme Court giving the Department of Government Efficiency, we're talking about DOGE, access to sensitive Social Security information, lifting restrictions a judge said were needed to protect the privacy of millions of Americans. So we kind of wanted to dig a little bit deeper into this. And we've got Greg Storr with us.
Yeah, he's Supreme Court reporter for Bloomberg News. He joins us from the Bloomberg Bureau in Washington, D.C. Greg, I want to get to the implications of this in a minute, but first I want to focus on everything Supreme Court. That certainly is your specialty. What was the case that the Supreme Court took on in this situation? We know how they ruled, but what was at issue here? Like, what was the law and the legal intricacy of this?
Yeah, Tim, the law is something called the 1974 Privacy Act, and a lawsuit by a couple of unions and an advocacy group said that the administration was violating that law by letting DOGE personnel basically have unfettered access to all this very sensitive data that the Social Security Administration has. And essentially what they were asking for was an order saying, you know, limit their access to the same sort of access that people within SSA have, where you have to go through certain training and you have to be at a certain level to get certain sensitive information. And for the most part, that information has to be anonymous rather than stuff that is personally identifiable.
So this feels kind of significant, Greg. Is it?
It is. It is. There's an awful lot of data there. You know, depending on who you believe, it may or may not be a really big privacy concern. Certainly, for the folks who challenged it, they said it absolutely is, and we are very, very worried about what's going to happen to this information. Now, the administration's argument is, look, we're coming in there to make things more efficient, to improve the way SSA works. And you should trust us because we're, you know, answering to the elected president. And so that's sort of the clash, and that's sort of what was presented to the court about whether this was such a concern that there ought to be an order keeping things on hold until the litigation got sorted out.
From a legal perspective, I'm curious if my question is even relevant. Wouldn't it be easy to argue that the individuals from DOGE or DOGE as an entity doesn't actually need access to my Social Security number, my address, or my tax history, those sorts of things, to make this more efficient?
Yeah, that was certainly the argument that the challengers were making, and that you referenced a judge at the very beginning, a federal district judge in Maryland, found that this was not information that they needed, and that the anonymous data would serve their purposes just as well. They hadn't shown any reason why they needed that stuff to connect you to your Social Security number or you know, your address or your employment history, that sort of thing. So that was certainly an argument, and that was presented to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court apparently was not bothered by that. They didn't give us a whole lot of reasoning. We don't really know what they were thinking, but it brushed those aside and said, we're going to put that lower court order on hold, which means that DOGE gets access to that.
Because DOGE is getting access to this, are there any restrictions on what it is able to do with this data? And I ask this in the context of what we've heard thanks to reporting from our colleagues and from other organizations about the use of AI within this administration. For example, there was a report coming from HHS just in the last couple of weeks, the MAHA report, that it turned out had indications that it had been generated by AI. There were some hallucinations in there when it came to some citations that ultimately were fixed, but it indicated to observers that AI had been used in the process of developing this report. Does it mean that our Social Security data could potentially be plugged into certain AI tools, third-party AI tools?
You know, Tim, it's really hard to say. I wouldn't want to say there are no restrictions on what they can do with it. There are laws out there, and we don't know how they will apply. And to be honest, we don't really know what DOGE is doing with this information, in part because there was a second thing the Supreme Court did at the same time on Friday, which was there's another lawsuit that's trying to get information from Doge about what it's doing exactly. And the Supreme Court, a lower court had said you can get the groups that were suing, or the group that was suing could get some information to try to get a sense of what Doge also ultimately might have to disclose. And the Supreme Court basically put that on hold as well. So it's certainly slowed down an effort to get more information about what Doge is doing.
I mean, does it come down to something as simple, Greg, as does Doge need access to the specifics of the information in order to get rid of waste and fraud? Does it come down to something as simple as that?
Well, that is certainly an argument that was being made. And if I told you it comes down to as simple as that, then I guess the answer is the Supreme Court seemingly said, yeah, they do need it, or at least we're going to trust them that they need it. Again, the court didn't really give its reasoning, but that was sort of what was presented to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court, at least for now, brushed aside those concerns that no, Doge doesn't really need this information.
Any view in terms of that the Supreme Court kind of rushed through this? There's a great part in your story about, in her dissent, how Justice Jackson said the lower courts had crafted an order tailored to the needs of the moment. She said the Supreme Court had truly lost its moorings by granting the government's request without requiring it to show that it was suffering any harm. So was there kind of a rushed element on all of this?
It's certainly what the dissenters would say. It was the three liberal justices all dissented, and you read really kind of the core of what Justice Jackson said in her dissent, that the court was not should have been requiring the administration to show, hey, we're really our efforts to improve efficiency, et cetera, really will be harmed, and that the court didn't make them show that. She would have kept everything on hold, limited Doge's access to the information, at least until the legal fight went forward and the courts could flesh out a little more the legal arguments on both sides. So again, that is certainly a criticism that's coming of what the court did on Friday.
Greg, just quickly, 30 seconds. I mean, outside observers of the court that you talk to, do they feel like this court is a very political one when you see decisions come down along political lines, or do they continue to think that the court is fair? Just quickly.
Different views, of course. We can certainly, we're starting to see a pattern with this court and how it deals with the administration. It has drawn a line with deportations that are happening without notice, but on almost everything else, it's siding with the administration and letting Donald Trump move ahead with his agenda.
All right, Greg Storr, Supreme Court reporter in our D.C. bureau.
It's 4:21 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg, and this Bloomberg Business Flash is brought to you by Oracle. Attention growing businesses. Oracle is offering to cut your current cloud bill in half if you move to Oracle Cloud Infrastructure. For new U.S. customers with minimum financial commitments, see if your company qualifies at oracle.com/Bloomberg. RFK Jr. removing all members of a CDC panel advising on vaccines. We'll have more on that topic for you coming up in just a moment. Indeed, some of the vaccine names right now, we do have Moderna after hours down 0.8%. Pfizer up 0.1%. J&J now trading unchanged. The Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ today ended with a mixed session. Little change, perhaps the better takeaway here, with the S&P 500 index down 5 points, up 0.1%. It was the Dow that was down 1 point. Again, little change there. NASDAQ up 61, gain there of 0.3%. 10-year at 4.47% with a 2-year 4.00%. Spot gold up $15 the ounce at $33.26, up by about 0.5%. West Texas Intermediate crude up 1.2%, $65.33 for a barrel of WTI. Big move for Bitcoin today, up by $2,500. Bitcoin up 2.4%, back above 108,700 on Bitcoin. So again, recapping, S&P up 5, up by 0.1%. And for on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Charlie Pellet. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie, thank you so much. Carol Massar along with Tim Stenovic live here at our bureau in San Francisco. So a lot going on. We want to get to something that just crossed a moment ago. The Department of Health and Human Services is retiring the 17 members of a committee of government vaccine advisors. This is coming from the U.S. Secretary Robert F. Kennedy of the department. He says a clean sweep is needed to reestablish public confidence in vaccine science. Again, that's a quote. He put this out in an opinion piece published in the Wall Street Journal. Let's get a little bit more on this. With us is Madison Moeller. She is Bloomberg News healthcare reporter, and she's back there in New York. Madison, this feels like a big deal. Explain what this committee of government vaccine advisors is there for. Let's start there.
Yeah, it is a big deal. I mean, this is definitely an unprecedented move. These are scientists, public health officials, vaccine advisors who usually don't really have like a political affiliation. They're in this position to act as, in an advisory role, to review the science, to discuss different recommendations around vaccines and ages and who should be using different vaccines. They meet a couple of times a year, and they are really responsible for helping to set the vaccine schedule for children. And this is something that Kennedy has been talking about. Obviously, a huge priority for him and for the administration is rooting out what they've called corporate influence in some of these science roles and in these health agencies. But these vaccine advisors, this committee is really seen as sort of like an independent agency, or not an agency, but an independent panel who make recommendations to the agency, and then they can act on that. And so what he's doing is, getting rid of all 17 members of this voting committee. They usually serve around 4-year terms. And what happens next is sort of to be determined, but they're saying that they are going to replace and appoint, an entirely new 17 voting members of this committee.
All right, wait. So new members are going to come in?
Yeah, that is what's likely going to happen. Because most of the members that were on this committee didn't have terms that expired until 2028. So in this op-ed, Kennedy said, without totally sort of stripping this committee clean of all the current members, they wouldn't have been able to appoint new people until 2028. And in that way, sort of treating these as political appointees, but historically they haven't been. It's scientists and public health experts who are typically appointed to this committee, and it's not really people that are seen as political appointees.
Madison, trying to understand the implications of a move such as this, does it mean that the childhood vaccine schedule could change? Does it mean that annual flu shots might not necessarily come with the same cadence or the same recommendation? What are the implications of this?
It's sort of to be determined because we don't know how quickly they're going to put new people in. You know, that's one of the things that we don't know yet, is maybe they already have a list of people that they're going to want to put into these roles. But, you know, there is an upcoming meeting, and it's important, I think, that they act quickly in order to ensure that the schedule and, you know, stays on track, and that they are able to roll out these important recommendations and to keep things moving. So right now, there's still a lot of questions that are not answered in this op-ed, but this was something that Bill Cassidy, Senator Bill Cassidy, actually was one of the agreements that he had with RFK and with HHS when he voted to confirm him, was that there wouldn't be major changes to this committee, which is called ASIP, without Cassidy being involved. And so we don't know, you know, if he was aware about this, but this is, you know, an important sort of agreement that the two had made, contingent on Bill Cassidy voting to confirm Kennedy.
You know, Madison, I think about this, right? With all kinds of healthcare, you need independence, you need transparency. You want to make sure that care and advisories around healthcare or vaccines are very true and safe, and there are no politics in it. There are no companies necessarily pushing anything. So what I'm curious is, I mean, if this panel becomes more politicized in some ways, does the AMA come in? Does somebody else come in and say, listen, there's a lot going on in Washington. Here's what we recommend. And is that enough for people to listen? Or do you need these panels or this committee because that's where healthcare coverage comes in? Or, you know, I'm just trying to understand the importance also of this committee beyond the advisory.
Yeah, I mean, this committee is really important for helping to set the, you know, immunization schedule for kids. And this is a part of the decision-making process that our healthcare agencies use. And I think that that's something we've been all trying to figure out, is there are a lot of changes happening with the way that they're, you know, around recommendations for vaccines, and, you know, how does this change the status quo? And are we going to see other outside agencies, like you mentioned, like AMA or other organizations come in and try to make their own recommendations? Like, we don't really know what's going to happen, but it's clear that there's definitely a shakeup happening in the, you know, regular way that our healthcare agencies operate. And I think that that's kind of what Kennedy and what, you know, some of his sub-agencies and subordinates want, is they want this shakeup. They think that that's a good thing. And it's sort of to be determined still what that actually will look like and sort of where the pieces will fall when it's all said and done.
Yep, definitely TBD, and we'll have to see how this plays out. Madison, thanks so much for jumping on this story with us and explaining it and laying it out. Bloomberg News healthcare reporter Madison Muller back there in our studio in New York. Tim?
Hey, watching shares of Apple today falling by 1.2%. The company's annual Worldwide Developer Conference kicking off in Cupertino. Ed Ludlow was there earlier. He brought you some updates. You could kind of wait around all year for the WWDC to get some news, or you could just read what Mark Gurman has been writing in his newsletter and what he's been reporting for Bloomberg subscribers and terminal clients, because he pretty much called everything. Mark Gurman is joining us now. He's managing editor for Global Consumer Technology. He joins us from our Bloomberg Los Angeles bureau. Mark, I'm kind of joking, but I'm also kind of not joking. We knew a lot of this was coming thanks to your reporting. Did you learn anything new at WWDC today?
I think we got everything. I think Apple told a good story. I think they showed a cohesive message of unification across its platforms. They definitely didn't pre-announce things. Everything you saw today is going to come out before the end of the year. That's why you didn't see much forward-looking stuff like you've seen the past 2 years. They got a lot of flack for that. The other thing to understand are the new iPad changes. The iPad multitasking changes are significant, all-encompassing, and have long been requested. They make the iPad function more like a Mac, and it certainly is going to be a big improvement for people who are relying more and more on devices like the iPad as their main computing platform.
Hey, one of the things that we've been talking about, we also, you know, caught up with Ed Ludlow earlier, who was also there, about AI models and opening that up to developers. Big deal, because we've talked with you several times about Apple really lagging behind when it comes to artificial intelligence. How do you see this move?
This was a necessary move. They need to open those underlying models in order to get developers to use Apple Intelligence and to make it a bigger competitor to the LLMs from other companies. So certainly this was a necessary move. This is another move that we had anticipated for days now. Certainly it's going to be seen which developers are going to want to do this. How good are these LLMs? Do developers really want to, hitch their wagon to Apple LLMs versus third-party LLMs that could also run on the company's devices? Certainly to be seen.
Hey, Mark, want to make sure we have a little bit of a delay, so I'm going to give our team a little bit of time to work on resetting this connection. Once again, we're speaking with Mark Gurman. He's head of Global Consumer Technology, managing editor for Global Consumer Technology. He's joining us from our Los Angeles bureau. Liquid Glass is the overhauled visual design for Apple's new software platform. That's how the experience is being described by Apple. Mark, what does that unveiling tell you or tell us about the way Apple's thinking about hardware moving forward?
In terms of Apple hardware moving forward, I think this new glass interface is a peak of what's to come. iOS 26 obviously has the Liquid Glass UI, and certainly there's going to be a lot of changes to the iPhone for the 20th anniversary in 2027, and an all-glass design is going to be part of that. And so now you'll have software and hardware that are both glass-heavy and all integrated. So I think this is a driving force behind that change.
Anything you heard from the developers that were there, Mark, that kind of, were they more hopeful? Were they more excited? Were they more like, we wanted more? I'm just curious, any kind of feedback that you've been hearing?
I think developers like the story Apple told. I think developers like the integration of large language models into Xcode for programming. I think developers are excited about the iPad multitasking changes, as I am. I think developers are excited about the new 3D web browser view on the Vision Pro and the widgets and the like. So I think there's a lot to like if you are a deep user of the Apple platforms. But remember, we're talking about legacy platforms here. We're talking about operating system franchises that have existed for decades. What we're not talking about are new interface paradigms, new operating systems, artificial intelligence, because quite frankly, Apple didn't have any of that to show today.
Yes. Okay, that's what I wanted to hit on, Mark, is what we still haven't seen from Apple when it comes to AI. You've long documented the struggles that the company has had. Everybody should go read your reporting on this. Did we get anything from Apple on AI today?
Apple is perfecting its past. It's not perfecting or setting the groundwork for its future. Wow. And that is a scary thing. Maybe
that's why we saw shares do what they did today, Carol. I don't know. Shares, look, shares only fell 1%, but
well, they didn't say anything to lower. They didn't say anything to drive shares down or up. They just didn't show anything remarkably innovative and exciting. Investors are looking for all the AI buzzwords. They're looking for AI innovation. You've seen it from Google, OpenAI, Anthropic, Microsoft, Meta. You've not seen it from Apple.
Yeah, it was about a 3% swing today, up as much as a 1%, down almost 2%, and finishing the day down about 1.2% here. All right, Mark, glad we could check in with you. Mark laid it out for us really ahead of the event, but just good to get him to weigh in kind of afterwards. Mark Gurman, he's Bloomberg News Managing Editor for Global Consumer Tech out there in our LA bureau.
Just reading the highlights from our live blog, the iPhone getting revamped, iPhone and camera apps that focus on simplicity. The AI features, though, Carol, underwhelming.
All right, when we come back, we're going to stay in Los Angeles. We're going to check the latest on the unrest, President Trump's response, and some of the latest headlines that we've seen across the Bloomberg. That's next.
4:40 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. The Department of Health and Human Services is retiring the 17 members of a committee of government vaccine advisors. That word from HHS Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. The group known as the Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices reviews the latest data and makes recommendations that determine whether insurers cover shots, among other things. Stocks moved higher today with the S&P 500 index eking out a gain as U.S.-China talks to resume. Traders are optimistic about those talks, driving stocks somewhat higher. S&P 500 index now nearly 2% away from its February peak. S&P 500 index up 5.6005, up by 0.1%. The Dow, we'll call it unchanged on the day, down by 1 point. NASDAQ higher by 61, gain there of 0.3%. Our Mag 7 index was up 0.9%. Apple on WWDC day today, we did see shares of Apple moving lower today by 1.2%. 10-year at 4.47%. The 2-year 4.00%. Gold up $16 the ounce, 33.26, up 0.5%. West Texas Intermediate crude 65.39 a barrel, up by 1.3%. Sharon Bell at Goldman Sachs says the rebound in stocks may not be sustainable.
Very sharply around those Liberation Day announcement. You've recovered all of that now. The market's bounced in the US, in Europe, in China as well. So you've seen a very hefty rise in markets, and valuations are now quite expensive.
Sharon Bell of Goldman Sachs. Again, the S&P up 0.3%, and that is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
Hey, thanks so much for that update, Charlie. Do appreciate it. Well, Los Angeles entered its 4th day of unrest sparked by immigration raids, with President Trump suggesting that Gavin Newsom should be arrested for his response, and the governor suing the administration for deploying National Guard troops to the city. Separately, the Pentagon is mobilizing 500 active duty Marines to help reinforce the National Guard in response to protests in Los Angeles. This according to a person familiar with the matter.
All right, so let's get to it with Sarah McGregor. She is with us. She's Bloomberg News National Team Managing Editor based in Los Angeles, and she joins us from the LA Bureau. Sarah, you know, we've talked with you before, different moments of crisis in and around the LA area. Just talk to us, first of all, a little perspective from you and this city and what you have seen over the last few days.
Absolutely. I think the last time we spoke, it was during the LA wildfires when the California National Guard were here to protect people. And of course, now we're seeing them in the city at the order of Trump against the wishes of Newsom, trying to quell demonstrations that are across the city. And just to put into context today, over the weekend, you know, we did see some violence, some clashes with the police, more than 30 people arrested at those. But, you know, it's quite isolated pockets. Downtown LA, just areas south of the city. This is in response to immigration raids. Today, what we're seeing are largely peaceful protests so far. There's a large gathering in downtown LA, but so far we aren't seeing that sort of violence that picked up later in the day yesterday. So, you know, just to put that into perspective, as the Marines are now being sent, actually we are reporting it's 700 now. We've gotten more information that it's now 700, and so apparently they're on their way to LA, and that definitely sets the stage for tensions to rise.
You know, I think people outside of the Los Angeles area and perhaps in Los Angeles, they see images of unrest in LA, and if they're of a certain age, maybe they think of 1992 and what we saw in the wake of the video of Rodney King being beaten and the riots that happened in April and May of that year. Can you contextualize that and just put this into historical context of what the city has seen?
I don't want to downplay anything because I do know, you know, police officers have been hurt, and they're, you know, the security forces have definitely had to respond, and they've thrown bricks. You know, different charges have been laid, including attempted murder for throwing a Molotov cocktail. So there's definitely some serious counts here, but ultimately, you know, the city is widely calm, and I think it's just sort of the comparable now of sending in the National Guard, now sending in Marines, that really it doesn't seem to be a match in terms of And that's what the Newsom administration would say. It doesn't really seem to be a match in terms of what the needs are for the security forces. So that's not to say that things could escalate, but I think the worry from Newsom, from Mayor Bass, is that it's actually by sending in the big guns that tensions will rise and people will lose their cool. And so I think they're more worried that the show of force will actually make the situation even worse.
You mentioned today, Sarah, that we're seeing some peaceful protests. I'm just curious, though, have the protests grown in number?
It is really hard to tell because they are spread out. It does seem in sort of similar numbers from day to day in terms of protesters. Today, we're actually seeing a large number of people in downtown LA protesting a major labor leader who has been detained. He's been charged actually now with obstructing the pathway of a federal vehicle, and so he's going to face charges on that. And some local leaders like Maxine Waters, some Democratic leaders, Adam Schiff, have called for his release, have asked to enter the detention center where he's being held, and they were denied. So I think that's raising some tensions on a whole other level of just a bit of an outcry about this labor leader being detained.
Sarah, when we last checked in with you regularly, it was during the devastating wildfires in and around the Los Angeles area. At that time, Mayor Karen Bass was getting a lot of criticism from folks about the city's response to the fires. How would you characterize the role that she's taken during this latest episode that we're speaking to you about? What has she been doing?
I think because, the exchange, especially today on social media, has largely been between Newsom and Trump. Newsom's, just sent a tweet out, for instance, with a picture of some of the National Guard sleeping on the floor, saying Trump sent these people here and now they have no place to rest, they have no food. It's sort of back and forth between Trump and Newsom. I think that's sort of overshadowed, I think, the efforts locally on the ground of what folks are doing, at least from a national perspective. So, Karen Bass has been up front. She's been holding press conferences. There hasn't been a criticism, I think, about the LAPD, the LA Police Force, and how they've been handling the situation writ large outside of Trump and his administration. So I think here at home, there isn't a lot of analysis yet, I suppose, of how it's being handled at a local level, but it does seem like it's, calm heads.
Sarah, I am also curious about kind of the mood and the viewpoint of most Los Angelinos, if you will. It's a diverse city. Folks from many walks of life in Los Angeles. So I'm just curious, what is the public's view, if there's a general view, when it comes to immigration right now?
Well, all of these protests did stem from some raids on Friday, and the public seeing the ICE folks mobilizing around Home Depots or the fashion district in LA to capture folks. And so that anger is palpable. That's where this all stemmed from. We have been receiving LAUSD. The school district has had a press conference today, telling people they're not going to cooperate with ICE in terms of, handing over anyone or giving names and numbers of, parents in the school district. They're going to protect the kids. So I do think it sort of raises that awareness that, in a way, I think there have been isolated raids in LA, but we haven't really felt the brunt of this deportation campaign by Trump. And I think as they've scaled things up to try and reach numbers, to try and reach their 3,000 a day minimum of arrests, we started to see LA be ground zero for that.
Yeah, it's been remarkable to see play out over the last 4 days. Governor Cuomo, who's running for mayor of New York City, was on Bloomberg Surveillance a little earlier, Sarah, and he made the point that you might actually see, he made the point that what you see in Los Angeles, you could see in New York City next. And I'm just wondering how you view a comment such as that with regard to what you've seen the federal government and what we've reported the federal government do in Los Angeles.
Absolutely. I mean, we are watching out, of course, to see if sort of protests break out in other cities in solidarity of what's happening in LA. We saw some protests in San Francisco, for example, yesterday where 60 people were arrested. So it is possible, especially in some of these blue states where they have sanctuary city policies that the Trump administration has been very critical of. It is something to watch out for, whether similar things will unfold in these cities.
All right, we're going to leave it on that note. Listen, Sarah, thanks so much for always keeping us up to date. Sarah McGregor, she is our Bloomberg News National Team Managing Editor. She's based in Los Angeles, and she's been joining us from our LA Bureau. All right, folks, if you are just joining us, just a reminder, markets, how they wrapped up for the day. It was kind of a bit of a quiet trade, if you will, and we did see the market averages kind of finishing off their best levels of the day, up about 5 points on the S&P 500, flat, just down 1 point on the Dow Jones Industrial Average, and then the NASDAQ 100 up about 36 points, or outperformer on a percentage basis, but not even quite 0.2%. It was that kind of a day.
It was, but still some really cool stories around stocks on the move. That's what we're doing next with Emily Grafeo.
Listening to Bloomberg Business Week Daily with Carol Massar and Tim Stenovec on Bloomberg Radio.
All right, everybody, you are back on Bloomberg Business Week Daily. Carol Massar along with Tim Stenovec.
Are you ready?
On the West Coast.
Are you ready?
Ready for...
We're going to take a plane south. We're going to fly over.
So here's the thing.
Tell me.
Because
What are
we
you
don't
looking
like
at?
to sit next to one
Oh,
another.
yeah, okay.
So it could get ugly.
It's going to be okay.
And you may only have one of us tomorrow. I'm just going to say.
Yeah, I might get kicked off the
No,
plane.
here's the thing. I love my colleagues.
I'm going to annoy you. I'm going to annoy you because we're going to fly right over.
We're actually going to end up talking
We're
because
going
we
to fly.
both had interesting
We'll
weekends.
fly right over my hometown. Okay, San Luis Obispo.
Okay.
Say wave to my parents. Okay.
I would love to wave to your
Wave to my
parents.
parents. We'll keep going. We'll go past Los Angeles. We'll fly over Orange County.
and
then we'll land
I'll only
in
ask
San
to get up to
Diego.
go to the bathroom like 10 times. See if
That's
that'll-
fine. Hey, that's why I sit in the aisle, so I can get up, okay? It's all good.
I'm Carol Massar along with Tim Stenovec. Let's take a look at some of the stocks on the move on this Monday. And with us is Bloomberg News cross-asset reporter Emily Grafeo. All right, Emily, where do you want to start?
Okay, let's start with Robinhood, ticker HOOD, HOOD, because that stock was down as much as 8.4% today. It did pare back most of those losses. It finished the day down about 2%. But this was all coming from speculation that it was going to be added to the S&P 500 with that announcement coming on Friday. But Friday afternoon came and went, and the S&P Index Committee actually made no changes to the current makeup of the index. So there was a lot of speculation, maybe Robinhood would be added, but it wasn't. And so that stock had hit several record highs last week, but it fell today.
I love this story. You wrote a great story about this that everybody should read on the Bloomberg Terminal or at Bloomberg.com. Emily, explain for everybody. And look, 13% higher last week on speculation that it would enter the index. Explain for everybody in a world of passive investing why stocks move higher when they are added to the index.
So there's a little bit of space in between the time that the index announces that it's going to make a change and when the change actually goes through. It's about, I think it's like 2 weeks. And so in that time, a lot of traders, hedge funds, they anticipate that when the changes actually go through, there's going to be a ton of buying. Passive indexes, ETFs, mutual funds that track the S&P 500 are going to have to buy this stock because they have to mirror what the index looks like. So they buy the stock before those changes actually go through to kind of get ahead of the trade, and then they sell it. So that's why actually sometimes on the days that the index changes actually go into effect, we see the stock fall. But we didn't even get to see that happen for Robinhood because, of course, it's not in the running right now. But maybe next quarter it will be added. We'll have to see.
I love it, right? It's a guessing game to some extent, right?
Oh, yeah.
And I feel like sometimes we feel like we really, really know, and then it doesn't necessarily play out that way. Hey, one group that we were watching in a big way, semiconductors. As a whole, the stocks was up, easily outpacing the overall broader market. Qualcomm, though, is one name that's been on your radar today.
Yeah, ticker QCOM. This was a standout because the chip maker reached an agreement to buy AlphaWave for about $2.4 billion in cash. You look at what the street had to say about this deal. Bloomberg Intelligence said that it confirms Qualcomm's ambitions to expand into the AI data center market. And I saw a couple other notes that were talking about how this is kind of like Qualcomm pivoting more into that data center play as opposed to just being known for the chip maker for Apple. I feel like I often read stories about Qualcomm, and the next description of the company is they supply chips for Apple. And so I guess they're trying to kind of diversify away from that. JP Morgan said this is a strategic acquisition to enhance its position in the data center market. The context for the stock here is that it's actually just up 1% year to date, slightly below what the market is doing. So they needed this gain today.
Carol, do you know where Qualcomm is based?
Nearby, isn't it?
San Diego.
Oh.
Where we're headed on Tuesday.
Wait, let's try this again. Ask the question again.
Do you know where Qualcomm is based?
San Diego.
It's San Diego. It's a big employer in San Diego.
We will be there on Tuesday.
We'll be there on Tuesday. All right, Emily Graffeo, we're not going to take a car, but maybe the tires of our airplane will be made out of Goodyear?
Yeah.
Made from Goodyear? Was that a segue?
That, I really didn't know where you were going with that, Tim. But sure, we can talk about this
Thank
stock.
you.
Goodyear Tire and Rubber finished the day up 11%. The ticker's GT. They got an upgrade over at BNP Paribas, and they said they upgraded the tire seller to outperform from neutral. They called the company a true tariffs winner, and they have industry low tariff exposure that's going to drive meaningful earnings upside. I feel like the last couple months and weeks, I've been looking for what is a tariff winner? What's a loser? This was not intuitive to me, like a tire maker. You'd think that there's a lot of supply chain dynamics that go into getting rubber and making a tire. But at least according to this latest upgrade, they're going to benefit from these Section 232 auto tariffs. Approximately, I'm just citing the analyst report, 55% of all U.S. tires sold now incur a 25% duty rate, but only 12% of their sales are subject to these tariffs. So that stock had a good day.
All right, good stuff. Good roundup of some of the movers on this Monday. That, of course, is Bloomberg News cross-asset reporter Emily Graffeo joining us with some of the stocks on the move. For more conversations, check out our Stock Movers podcast. It's 5-minute episodes of some of the biggest winners and losers in the stock market, and you can find it on Apple, Spotify, or anywhere you get your podcasts.
Is that it for us today?
That's it. That's it for us.
It's approaching being it for us.
You could
today.
do more if you want to stick around.
We got to go.
We got a plane.
We got to go.
We're leaving
But
on a jet plane.
Tomorrow, tune in because we got a
Don't
great.
know when I'll be back again.
All right, so now
No,
I
I
am
do
gonna,
know
now
when.
I am going to ask to switch seats. We got a great program coming up tomorrow from San Diego.
Yeah, definitely be with us. A very special Cisco event. A lot of executives from there. So do join us. Do not go anywhere right now, though. Balance of Power starts now.
This is Balance of Power, live from Washington, D.C.
From Bloomberg's Washington, D.C. studios to our TV and radio audiences worldwide, welcome to Balance of Power. Alongside Joe Matthew, I'm Kaylee Lyons.
Tonight, the standoff in Los Angeles. The state of upheaval
Why
in
did we
L.A.
need to have
after weekend
raids
demonstrations.
Here? It was very clear that if raids happened here, that the community was going to respond in a very negative way.
The state of upheaval in L.A. after weekend demonstrations over a series of federal immigration raids deteriorated into street clashes with ICE officers and local police. The president overriding California's governor and local officials by sending in 2,000 National Guard troops. And now the Pentagon this evening mobilizing about 700 active duty Marines to provide reinforcements to those troops. We'll have a report from the ground.
Plus, in London, and hoping to make a deal. U.S. and Chinese negotiators spent hours in trade talks today as the U.S. signals a willingness to move on some key issues. We'll have details of the progress made on day one with another round of talks set for tomorrow.
And Republicans wave goodbye to Elon Musk. Musk's strong and vocal opposition to the Trump tax package does not appear to be threatening the bill as Republican lawmakers race to get it done by their July 4th deadline. Republican Congressman Darrell Issa of California will join us with more. We begin, though, with the escalating clashes in Los Angeles, a fourth day of protests against the administration's immigration crackdown as demonstrators face off with law enforcement, including more than 2,000 National Guard troops. President Trump deployed them over opposition from the governor of California, Gavin Newsom, who is demanding their removal, calling it a, quote, serious breach of state sovereignty. President Trump responding this afternoon.
It's lucky for the people in Los Angeles and in California that we did what we did. We got it just in time. It's still simmering a little bit, but not very much.
The president's words there running counter to the action the administration is now taking, sending about 700 active duty U.S. Marines to help quell the protests. It's an explosive moment that seemingly erupted overnight, but was months in the making after community leaders railed against ICE raids and deportations, with more than 87,000 arrests made by ICE since Inauguration Day, and the agency deporting roughly 77,500 people, leading to scenes like the one you're seeing if you're with us on Bloomberg TV, Democratic lawmakers getting arrested themselves in some instances as they demonstrated against the moves, with the administration, of course, looking to make good on its promise to carry out mass deportations. But let's go now on the ground to Los Angeles, where we find Bloomberg's Alicia Caldwell for the latest developments. So, Alicia, obviously the addition of Marines now being sent to Los Angeles, a major escalation. What's likely to happen from here?
It's unclear what's next. There's, a few hundred National Guardsmen who are on the ground in Los Angeles. They've been primarily focused around, or singularly focused rather, around federal buildings in the downtown area. Where those 700 Marines are headed is unclear. It appears they will back up the National Guard and bolster those National Guardsmen, but it's highly unusual for active duty troops. I'm not sure this has much precedence. We've seen, of course, in the past of U.S. history, federalized National Guard troops. And of course, National Guard troops are activated not routinely, but when needed by state governors. We saw it here in Los Angeles after the wildfires in January. That part's not unusual. The unusual part is the federalized nature of this and the active duty Marines.
The active duty Marines, the most recent development here following news that the governor is in fact filing suit over this, suing the administration over the initial deployment of National Guard troops. Alicia, I presume that covers any military that's going to be on the streets of Los Angeles. What do we know about this legal action?
That's my understanding as well, that basically the governor has said, this is in violation of state rights, if you will, and is challenging this deployment altogether. Now, military, as a rule, active duty military is prohibited from participating in civil law enforcement. We'll see what their exact role is, but what we're seeing across LA right now are reports of continued arrests by Border Patrol and ICE and others who are working with those two agencies. We have contractors who are driving vehicles loaded with folks who had been arrested in Home Depot parking lots and other incidents or other locations. So we're seeing the ICE activity continue, which the agency promised over the weekend that people in the city would see that activity continue. Protests have continued as well. There's a gathering in downtown Los Angeles right now that, for the moment, appears largely peaceful. We'll see how the day progresses. Historically, what we've seen in the last several days is things start small, things start rather peaceful, occasional skirmishes, but now, as the day progresses, we see more and more violence, as we did over the weekend, particularly last night, as things escalated with confrontations between demonstrators and the Los Angeles Police Department.
Alicia, it's great to have you with us here. Bloomberg's Alicia Caldwell from our Los Angeles bureau. We thank you. And for more on the legal implications of this escalation in L.A., we turn to David Leopold, former president of the American Immigration Lawyers Association, partner and group leader now in immigration at UB Greensfelder. It's great to have you back with us. And I'm wondering your thoughts on the grounds, the legal grounds that this White House is hinging all of this on, with the idea of squelching a rebellion in the streets of L.A. That was the justification for sending in the National Guard. Did you see a rebellion on the streets of L.A. last night?
No, I haven't seen a rebellion, nor has anybody else. What you've seen is people exercising their First Amendment rights, the right to redress the government. That's called protest. That is in the Constitution. And that is what these troops are being sent out to suppress. That is not American. That is not part of our core values. And when you think about it, who are they targeting? These ICE personnel in full military garb, they're targeting essential workers, the people who put food on the table, the people who work hard. I think Governor Gavin Newsom put it very succinctly the other day when he was interviewed. These are people who are hardworking folks. And to send full military garb-dressed National Guard, and now to call in the Marines, this is shocking.
Well, David, to that point, how much of an escalation is the deployment of active duty members of the United States military? What is the legal justification for such a move? How does it contrast with the one to deploy the National Guard?
I suspect that what they're going to say is they're not there to enforce civil law, but I think it doesn't fly. That's exactly what they're there for, the Marines, and I think we're going to see Governor Gavin Newsom and others go right into federal court to stop this. Look, this is a deliberate spreading of chaos, confusion, and fear by the administration. To what end? I mean, there's a number of different motivations. They want to get this bill through Congress with $151 billion plus for immigration enforcement. They've got a problem with former friend Elon Musk trashing that bill. Don't take my word for it. That's what the president's deputy chief of staff, Stephen Miller, tweeted the other day or earlier today. I don't know. But there's other motivations here. But look, this is really dangerous stuff. Immigration is the tip of the spear aimed at the heart of due process, aimed at civil liberties in this country, and we are sadly seeing it come to fruition.
Well, you wonder if it lands in Gavin Newsom's lap in a very real way. You've heard the threats from the border czar, Tom Homan, to arrest the governor of California, and he actually did talk about this last evening on cable news, addressing that threat on MSNBC. David, let's listen together.
He's a tough guy. Why doesn't he do that? He knows where to find me. But you know what? Lay your hands off 4-year-old girls that are trying to get educated. Lay your hands off these poor people that are just trying to live their lives, man. Trying to live their lives, paying their taxes, been here 10 years. The fear, the horror. The hell is this guy? Come after me, arrest me. Let's just get it over with.
Well, he hasn't been arrested yet, David, but even Donald Trump said today if he were Tom Homan, he would arrest Gavin Newsom, and he suggested that Gavin Newsom might enjoy it for the publicity. Does the White House have the legal standing to arrest the sitting governor of California?
It's not even a question. Absolutely not. I mean, it is. Look, if this wasn't so terrifying a moment where the President of the United States and his chief immigration czar are threatening the sitting governor of the largest state in the union, or any state in the union, with arrest because he is doing his job, he is protecting the people of California, and he's right. If they're so tough, stop arresting 4-year-old girls, stop arresting dishwashers, stop arresting people who are putting food on our table, people who are taxpayers. This is really appalling. And I commend Governor Newsom for standing up for what's right and for doing his job. They're not going to arrest Newsom. They have no grounds. The President of the United States or Tom Homan, they have no grounds. And this thuggish talk has no place in American politics and in American discourse, let alone coming from the mouth of the President of the United States and his top aides. Appalling.
Well, David, when we consider what started all of this, the idea that there is great upset about the action of ICE and immigration authorities and raids that they were conducting in Los Angeles, that is why we are seeing protests continue for a fourth day, which I believe we can show you if you're with us on Bloomberg TV or on YouTube. When we consider the actual action immigration authorities are taking, do we have any evidence of them operating outside legal bounds? Do we know for certain that all of these people they're looking to arrest are being given adequate due process?
Well, that's the whole point. They've stopped trying to give. They've attempted to knock down due process from the day that the president was sworn into office. We saw what happened to those who were, sent off without trial, without hearing to El Salvador under the Alien Enemies Act. You talk about rebellion now going on in California, which is not happening. There was no rebellion by any Venezuelans. No invasion by Venezuela to justify the Alien Enemies Act. There's no justification for the attempt to stop birthright citizenship. Most of the things, or all of the things that they've gone after, have no justification. And here's the thing. The President of the United States ran on a platform of securing the border, right? That's what he ran on. That's what he won on, at least in part. That's been done. The border's quiet. And I think most of the Americans who voted for him are going to be absolutely stunned and surprised that what they voted for, or what they're seeing now, is a president and a group of, enablers who are trying to shut down due process and throw out and shred the Constitution of the United States.
All right, David Leopold, we appreciate your time, former president of the American Immigration Lawyers Association and partner and group leader in immigration at UB Greensfelder. Thank you so much. Coming up, we'll have a status update on today's trade talks in London between the U.S. and China. We'll dive into what's next for these negotiations with Melanie Hart, senior director at the Atlantic Council's Global China Hub, and speak with Republican Congressman Darrell Issa of California. Coming up on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and 3.
insurrectionists. They're bad people. They should be in jail.
President Trump earlier today reacting to protests in Los Angeles, where the National Guard and now active duty U.S. Marines have been deployed. For more here on Bloomberg TV and radio, we turn now to Capitol Hill, where Republican Congressman Darrell Issa of California is joining us live. Congressman, welcome to Balance of Power. We appreciate your time, sir. When we consider the actions of the administration here, why should this not be seen as an encroachment on state sovereignty, on states' rights?
Well, because it's not about states' rights, it's about supremacy. It was about supremacy when Eisenhower sent troops in to Alabama. It was about supremacy when Lyndon Johnson did it. When the Constitution, when citizens are not being protected by their state, they have every right to be protected. In this case, law enforcement was overwhelmed by insurrectionists. The president saw that. As a matter of fact, our ICE agents called for support and waited 2 hours before they got any relief. So no question at all. There was a valid reason the president did it, and he did it for the same reason the presidents have done it in the past.
Is there a difference in your mind between deploying National Guardsmen and active duty United States Marines, active duty U.S. military members on U.S. soil?
Oh, absolutely. There's a difference. And here's the difference. Those National Guardsmen are regularly deployed as an extension of law enforcement, which they have been. The Marines have been deployed specifically to protect federal property, which they have every right to do, and they will do that. The president is appropriately using each of them in a way that complies with federal law passed by Congress.
I want to ask you about Congress and the Posse Comitatus Act. If we're going to put military troops on the ground here in this country, Congressman, shouldn't you and your colleagues have a say?
Well, actually, we did have a say, and we passed that law, and it very much, in addition to the Insurrection Act, each of them defines when and how you can use those forces. But understand, the National Guard, activated by the federal government, does in fact have the right to do exactly what they're doing. And let's understand, you can see those forces. Are they making arrests? For the most part, they're not. What they're actually doing is they're giving the police the ability to make those arrests. Out of 100 arrests, 47 of them were done by California badged law enforcement. The rest were mostly done by ICE, taking into custody people they had warrants for. So they're doing exactly what they're supposed to do. When you hear differently, you're not hearing from the police differently. You're hearing from the very people who are supporting this lawlessness, the burning of vehicles, the bricking and cinder blocking of law enforcement trying to do their job.
Well, when we consider ICE, Congressman, administration officials, including the White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt, are pointing to the one big, beautiful bill that just passed your chamber, that it would hire 10,000 new ICE personnel, 5,000 new customs officers, 3,000 new Border Patrol agents. Do the scenes we're seeing out of Los Angeles make it harder for any of your Republican colleagues in the House to vote no if this package is to return to the House changed in some way by your colleagues in the U.S. Senate?
Well, look, I voted yes. Almost every Republican voted yes. I expected to come back from the Senate with some changes. But one of the important things is that we do need to back not just the men and women in blue locally, but those who bear that same responsibility federally, and we intend to do so. Understand, the last administration let over 10 million people into the country, many of whom are already due to leave and haven't left. So there's going to be a huge job, and we're going to need the resources to do it. And President Trump ran on making this change. He's making this change, and he's doing it pursuant to the Constitution. And yes, there have been court challenges, and he's respected the outcome in the court. But he was elected to do this. I was re-elected to do this. And I expect that we are going to bring safety. You know, and the midterm elections are coming up in just a matter of months again. And we're going to be asked a question, are Americans safer now than they were 2 years ago? And we have to be able to answer, yes, they are, because Donald Trump did and because Congress backed him.
All right, Congressman, great to have you with us. Republican Congressman Darrell Issa of California, we thank you. Another day of trade talks in London are on the schedule between the U.S. and China. Here's the president earlier today on where negotiations stand. Leading the talks for the U.S., Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, along with Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick and U.S. Trade Representative Jamieson Greer, all in the same room and at the table. And Bloomberg's Anne-Marie Hordern has more from London.
After more than 6 hours of talks in London, the U.S. and Chinese delegations have left without an agreement, but they did agree to meet again tomorrow. So positive signals that potentially they can come to an understanding. What we are hearing is potentially the United States is willing to ease some export controls. That was really underscored here by the fact that Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick joined the delegation. He was not present for the Geneva talks just about 4 weeks ago. In exchange, what Washington wants to see out of Beijing is an advanced pace of those rare earth licenses and magnets. This is critical to the U.S. defense and tech industry, especially in things like mobile phones. Leaving the meetings in London in this 19th century mansion, Secretary Bessent said it was a good meeting with a thumbs up. Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick said they were fruitful. Joe, Kaylee, we'll see if they bear results tomorrow.
Bloomberg's Anne-Marie Hordern reporting from the ground in London. And for more on these trade talks, we turn now to Melanie Hart, Senior Director at the Atlantic Council's Global China Hub, who is here with us in our Washington, D.C. studio. So, Melanie, where should we be setting the bar of the outcome of a second day of talks tomorrow? Is it enough if they just walk away with a handshake and we agree not to escalate, at least for now?
The bar should be pretty low. You know, the goal for these talks is just to get back to where we were a couple of weeks ago in May when the U.S. and China negotiated tariff ceasefire to create a 90-day process to have deeper discussions.
You made a great point there. This isn't exactly progress if we're just trying to get back to a point that followed so-called Liberation Day. There's been this idea of relief, though.